For coming. I want to welcome you. My name is Bill Roshan. I'm the chairperson, and I want to welcome you to a regular meeting Tuesday, June 6th at the Veterans Memorial Building of the Planning Commission for the City of Morro Bay. We have a quorum tonight, and so let me introduce the commissioners for you. On my far right, Commissioner Eric Meyer. My near right, Commissioner Mike Rodriguez, Vice Chair. On my left, Commissioner Joseph Ingrafia. And sad to say, we are without Asia King tonight. She wasn't feeling well, wasn't going to be able to make the meeting, but she's such a trooper. She sent in comments on a number of the issues. So we do have something written for her and from her, and that'll be great. So with that, we've got a quorum. If we could start with a moment of silence. Thank you all very much. And the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. There are a couple of Planning Commissioner announcements. Let me ask everybody, do you folks have anything? No? No? I wanted to announce that I'm thrilled to say, and Councilmember Azar is here in the audience, I was able to attend the Offshore Wind Summit in Sacramento. That happened, I think it was like May 8, 9, and 10. And it's very important to Morro Bay. So I was glad I was able to go up there and hear what was said. There were quite a few folks there, both from the state, Fed, and also all the folks, the companies going after the lease agreements were there and spoke as well. I look forward to us getting public hearings and a chance forums to talk about it. It's very exciting and very important to us. So I wanted to let everybody know that I was able to do that, and Zara was there, so was Carla. We had Public Works too, right? No? The Chamber was there, yes, yeah. So we were represented. With that, one more Commissioner announcement. July 4th, unless everybody really wants to meet on July 4th, we're going to move the meeting to the 5th. And I only announce it because we're very excited that there's a good potential we're going to hold that meeting at the Morro Bay Elementary School auditorium. And I know many of you know it well. I got the chance to tour it, and it's a great building, really exciting, and it'll really be fun for us to, I think, to have one of our meetings there. So mark your calendars, and if you can, we're going to have a conclusion to our historic discussions, and there's going to be several people, including an architectural historian, speaking about the building in Morro Bay. With that, let me open public comment. This is a time where you can speak on anything, even if it's not on the agenda. And if you have to leave, you're welcome to make your public comments now on any agenda items. Do I have any takers? Anybody on the Zoom call? Anthony, do we have any hands raised?
Thank you, Chair Roshan. There are currently no raised hands in the queue.
Okay, then we get to move. Last chance. Seeing and hearing none, we're going to move. We have 3 items tonight, and what I'd like to suggest, commissioners, if you agree, we would like to do B1, which is the 413 Arcadia Avenue case. Then I'm going to suggest we move the objective design guidelines behind the water supply and demand assessments. If that's okay with everybody, I think that would give us more time. I think the design guidelines are going to demand as much time as we can. So if we're going to do that, I'd like to introduce case, the appeal of director's action, 413 Acadia Avenue, Morro Bay, and let me turn it over to staff.
Yes, Chair Roshan, the consent calendar, can we?
Oh, did I skip that?
Yeah.
Okay, do we need a vote on that?
This is just the current and advanced planning list, so it's a receive and file. If you had questions, that's all you're really looking
I'm sorry, I missed that. Any questions? No. Hearing none, back to case B1.
All right.
Thank you for catching that. Should we start with the staff presentation, Scott?
Yeah, I'm getting it up right now. All right, thank you, Chair Roshan. This item before you this evening is an appeal of director's decision related to a shed located at 413 Arcadia. Appellant is Patrick Najjar. Back in June of 2021, staff received a complaint regarding construction of a shed at this location. Code enforcement conducted an investigation of the site, found the shed in violation of Morro Bay Municipal Code, and sent a letter to Mr. Najjar directing the shed be either removed or relocated. The side setback in this location, which is where the shed was located, the shed is considered an accessory structure under the city's municipal code, and the 5-foot side yard setback is what applies to the neighborhood where Mr. Najjar lives, Arcadia. I have the definition of an accessory structure on the screen there. It means a building, part of a building or structure that is detached from the main building and that use of which is incidental to the main building, such as, but not limited to, detached garages, detached decks, storage buildings like the shed, and gazebos. We have additional policy language as it relates to how accessory buildings are regulated, and that's found in section 1748040B, and that's on the screen in front of you highlighted in yellow. And it says, where an accessory structure is attached to the main building, it shall be made structurally apart and have a common roof system with the main building and shall comply in all respects with the requirements of this title applicable to the main building. Unless so attached, meaning if it's detached, an accessory building in an R district shall meet the setback requirements, which is the 5-foot I referenced earlier, the height and coverage requirements of the zone, and be at least 6 foot from any dwelling existing or under construction on the same lot or any adjacent lot, except temporary non-permanent buildings. I think most of the appeal, focus by Mr. Najjar is related to that temporary non-permanent nature there, and I'll speak more about that as we go into the presentation. Right on the screen now, you can see I see a site plan on the left, and the area outlined in red is the location of the shed, and then you can actually see a picture of it adjacent to that. It's behind the fence, and it's kind of that slanted roof structure there.
We're not seeing it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, hopefully they're fixing that.
Is your screen the same as your computer?
Yeah, unfortunately.
So it's a linkage problem.
Yeah, something going on.
Sorry about that.
Is the screen working, Scott? The one on the left?
Is it, so,
My left?
oh, that one over there? It's probably, is it the same?
Neither one?
Neither one of them.
This one's got movie on it.
Oh, that's Morro Bay. That's the harbor. I'm just kidding.
I don't think
I'm
so.
just kidding.
I'm in that harbor all the time
Eric just volunteered to. Some improv? Eric?
Oh, hey, all right.
You're 1 through 2 now. Probably the same program.
We're getting there.
4 planning commissioners walk into a bar.
All good,
No.
okay.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you, Ray.
All right.
Scott, you're on.
Yeah, moving forward. So the picture on the screen, as I indicated previously, is that you have a site plan on the left, the little red circle there shown on that is the location of the shed, and then the picture on the right shows the shed. It's the slanted roof structure that's in the side setback adjacent to the house that's on the left there. So we have the grounds for the appeal, and then they're followed by the staff response to those. So these are from Mr. Najjar. And it indicates here that he was told that he could build before having the prefab shed built, that he could build in this location based on information provided by the planning department, that as long as it was under 120 square feet and 8 feet tall, it had no foundation and was not a permanent structure, then it could go anywhere behind backyard fence as long as it was not in the front or corner setback. And then it indicates that we gave him paperwork supporting that. Did have conversations with Mr. Najjar about this. I'm not sure about the timing of this. The 120 square foot and 8 foot in height requirement was actually under the draft code, so that's not something we would have handed out to people. It is something that we did look into in conversations with Mr. Najjar, but that was later on after he received code enforcement violation letter. So the requirement would simply have been at the time that it not be located in a side setback under the current code. Grounds for Appeal 2 Mr. Najjar was told by me after telling him that I had a complaint from a neighbor that resulted in a complaint from the city that it would need to be moved, the shed. And then after he'd asked multiple questions about the structure, asked all about it, but he was most concerned if it had a permanent foundation. So Mr. Najjar is describing a conversation that I had with him over the phone about the location of the shed once he had received the violation letter. We did discuss whether it was a non-permanent structure or not. No decision was made on that. In fact, we were going to look into that more, although that was one of the things we were looking at. I did go back and look at the draft code at the time, which did allow for a shed in the side setback. But again, that wasn't in place. But we did pause enforcement action because we did have pending zoning requirements that would have allowed the shed to remain. I didn't think it was fair at the time, if that was potentially going to happen, to make him remove it only to be able to put it back. That didn't seem like, again, that was very fair. So I didn't make him remove it at the time or relocate it. Oh, and he had some additional items in there. So the policy related to sheds in the new zoning code, it says it's the area in yellow there. It talks about small structures less than 8 feet in height and 120 square feet in size may extend to the lot line for interior and side setbacks when located behind the primary structure. That when located behind the primary structure was added by the Planning Commission when you were going through your recommendation hearings to City Council. So what I was talking about before is that the draft language didn't originally include that, and that was added by the Planning Commission and was eventually adopted by the City Council into the current code, which is pending certification by the Coastal Commission right now. Grounds for Appeal 3. This also refers to conversations that Mr. Najjar and I had related to the shed, where it's located on the lot. It also refers to the roof and the location of the shed being between the property line and the house. Talks about the questions that I asked him related to that structure. And then indicates that I said, rest assured that I would not he would not have to worry about moving the shed. Never told Mr. Najjar that this was going to be considered a temporary non-permanent structure under the code. I said we would look at that. We did research on it, and the city did not have a practice of doing that for sheds. They'd have made sheds to this point even, comply with the setback requirements of the zone. So we did look into that, but again, paused the enforcement because the draft zoning code was going to allow for it at the time. Grounds for Appeal 4 indicates that Mr. Najjar spoke with Scott Collins about this, and that Scott Collins, again, discussed the foundation type and the non-permanent nature of it. Indicates that he'd come in, Mr. Najjar had come in and talked to staff several times about the requirements for placement of a shed. It indicates that he appealed the decision in writing, one by one. That just means that as part of the enforcement letters that we issued him, he provided us letters in response to that, refuting the enforcement action. And then it goes on to say that should have been the end of the story, but wasn't. My response to that is, can't really speak to what conversations Mr. Najjar had with former city manager Collins. Again, it wasn't the city's practice to consider sheds temporary or non-permanent structures. We could find no evidence of that in the city's records. The only appeal was this actual appeal that was submitted on March 15, 2023. Again, Mr. Najjar was, I think, referring to letters he provided to the city trying to explain why the shed was not in violation of the city's municipal code. He did also refer to some improvements he made to the shed. That was made at the direction of the city after we received complaints from the neighbor that the shed was draining water and focusing water onto the adjacent property. We sent a letter to Mr. Najjar requesting that he fix that and that he not direct water onto the adjacent property. And he did eventually fix that and provided a drain that kept the water on his side, I believe. Excuse me. Grounds for appeal number 5 kind of goes over a lot of the other things that I've already spoken to. Says the city is now trying to argue that they are waiting for the new code to see if it fits within the code, but this meaning the shed, and it did fit within the code at the time of the building, and all their information, they added the line 18 months later. That's the change that was made by the Planning Commission. That refers to not allowing the shed unless it's behind the primary structure, but still allows it in the setback. And then it speaks to why would the city need to wait for the new code if it was not legal to begin with. It was legal to begin with. They wrote me out of the code with that change that we made. The shed has been looked at by fire department twice, and the fire chief said it was not a code violation. It's not a public danger. Relates to a neighbor dispute. I think I've covered most of the issues related to this. The fire department in this instance isn't the one responsible for enforcing the municipal code as it relates to the zoning code. That's the Community Development Department, the Planning Commission, hence the reason it's in front of you this evening. So the requested relief by the appellant, number 1, is allow the shed to remain in its location. Then he goes on to indicate that it's legal under old code after forcing improvements and 18 months in place, legal non-conforming under new code, was legal under new code before code changed after the shed was built, to also protect my house from mold issues caused before placement of the shed. I just go back to the shed isn't allowed under either code, so it's a violation of the municipal code. And then Mr. Najjar goes on to request revocation or order that his tickets, we issued 2 citations, and that those be rescinded. Again, the shed's a violation of the municipal code, and unless the Planning Commission provides some other interpretation, the citations would stay in place. And I would also note that revocation of the administrative citation is not under the purview of the Planning Commission. Same for item 3, just reiterates the second item. Recommendation, staff recommends the Planning Commission adopt the attached resolution, which is 1023, denying the appeal of staff's decision and finding the shed at 413 Arcadia in violation of zoning code section 1748040B. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Commissioners, questions for staff? Eric, Mike, Joe.
Just so I'm clear, I believe it's the 1995 code that controls the code that was in effect when that, and that code says you cannot put an accessory structure in the setback unless it's a non-permanent temporary dwelling.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
Clear, thank you. Let's see, let me invite up Mr. Najjar, and we can put 10 minutes on the clock for his presentation. And then, is Mr. Najjar here today? Ah. Welcome. You have 10 minutes.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. I am Patrick Najjar, the appellant and owner of the property at 413 Arcadia. Previous to owning this property, it was in disrepair and definitely not an asset to the neighborhood. It now provides 2 low-income housing units, one of which is my residence. Because of ongoing health issues that prevent me of holding a full-time job, I fit the low-income criteria. Both these houses have very small closets, 4 feet 6 inches long and only about 14 inches deep, and no other storage space. I am financially, until I am financially able to make structural additions, I decided to add temporary storage for my tenants. In 2021, I visited the planning department to ask about permits, shed size, location, etc., and based on the verbal information I received and the 2 documents, pages 29 and 30 in your packets, I spent about $3,000 to install a prefab, no foundation storage shed. The day after the shed was installed, my neighbor, Dr. Garcia, objected to the shed, saying that water would run off onto a cement walkway and the shed would have to be removed. I immediately offered to add a gutter and attempted to discuss it with him, but he insisted it had to be removed and filed a complaint with the city. In response to the complaint, I did install a temporary gutter on the shed within a day of getting the complaint. I was and still am willing to install a better gutter. To my knowledge, however, even with the heavy rains this year, there has been no damage to Dr. Garcia's driveway from any runoff. My appeal document and my letter of February 28th, pages 24 to 28 in your packet, give a chronological history of my experience over the past 2 years. So I won't repeat that here except for my initial telephone conversation with Scott Graham after I was notified of the complaint. Scott told me the shed was allowed as installed and to rest assured it's a temporary, non-permanent structure, that it will not need to be moved. He then asked, hold on a minute, let me check the new code for you. After a moment, he came back and said, nope, even under the new code, you're still fine. A subsequent call to City Manager Scott Collins, I had the same response. He said it was a temporary structure, was allowed. In both instances, I fully described the shed, no foundation, shape, location, everything about it, and they both agreed it was a temporary, non-permanent structure. 18 months later, Code Enforcement Officer Nafour visited Dr. Garcia again, but never accepted my invitation to visit my property. After I received a notice from Nafour, suddenly the same people who assured me all was fine started saying maybe the shed wasn't temporary after all, or might not be allowed when the code changed. And then specific wording was added to the new code draft that made my shed and many others illegal. Will those others also have to be removed? I mean, there's hundreds throughout the city that fit those temporary, non-permanent, or if they were not temporary, non-permanent, would be outside code. For the record, to disassemble and relocate the shed will cost an estimated $5,000 due to post-pandemic cost increases for labor and materials, and an amount I can't afford. This whole process has been 2 years of great frustration and stress for me. Tonight, I ask you to consider 3 points. Point number 1, I spent $3,000 to install a nice looking shed based on the verbal and written information I requested and relied on from the planning department. I would not have done that if I had been told the codes were about to change. Point number 2, after the shed was in place for over a year, new wording was added, the code that specifically made my shed illegal. which seems to be selective enforcement, discriminatory, and unfair. Point number 3, the shed has now been in place for 2 years and has caused no damage to my neighbor's property. And in all fairness, this temporary, non-permanent, foundationless shed should be grandfathered in as is. Commissioners, I ask you to please honor the fact that I followed the rules as they were given to me and allow the shed to remain in its current location as illegal, non-conforming, and rescind the penalties that I have been assessed. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Najjar. Commissioners, questions for the appellant? Mike? Joe? Thank you very much. At this point, we would like to have public comment. So anybody who would like to speak to this case, please step forward. If you would, give us your name, and if you would like to, your address. And welcome.
Thank you. My name is Matt Makowetsky. I live at 422 Arcadia, across from the existing house and shed. I'm here to speak, obviously, to this B1. First of all, I am in agreement with the director's decision to deny the appeal for this structure at 413, and I have 3 reasons. First, the shed does not comply with the setback requirements from 1748-040B. Because it is in front, looking at the picture as we had, the shed itself is where it is located. It can be moved to the back of this existing lot. There are 2 structures now, and there is another shed in the back, but there is sufficient room to do that. 2, the existing placement of the shed is directly on the property line, which creates a water issue with the house right next door to it. But however, there's third one that is not spoken to, especially in terms of the Planning Commission, and that is fire hazard. And why is the existing shed takes up the entire setback from the existing structure to the property line, but that's on the north side of the property. On the south side of the property, there's a driveway, and there is usually a car in that driveway. Speaking of that, in terms of if there were ever a fire, and there has not been, but however, the big word is if, having the fire be able to get through to the back of that structure, because there is another apartment house in the back, with that shed there is beyond difficult, and if there is a car there. So in terms of fire access, that becomes a big problem. And with that, a solution could be, as reading the code as it is, and I know you probably have, is that this shed can be moved. It is a small, does not have a base. It can be moved. It's under 7 feet tall. It fits the square foot requirements of such a shed. It can be moved to the back of this property. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Others who'd like to speak? Public comment is still open. Please. Welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is John Weiss. I'm a resident. Is my time up? Wouldn't be the first time. I'll start over, if I may. My name is John Weiss. I'm a resident and business owner in Morro Bay. I've been in Morro Bay as a resident for 35 years, business owner for 45 years. I sympathize with Mr. Garcia, though I don't know him personally. And but what I can speak to personally is to Mr. Najjar. He does work for me, and he's worked for me for several years. I trust him. I know him to be a person of his word. I entrust him thousands of dollars of inventory, customer goodwill, advertising, and I believe him. Thankfully, I'm not a city commissioner or a planner, so I'm not going to speak to the technical issues that have been discussed, and I understand. Although there was one comment, and I respect the person immensely for his comment, but if the fire department has been there twice to say that it's not a problem or a hazard, I would go with expertise. Looking at the report, and I do have it, and I printed it out, it suggests that Mr. Najera is not truthful, and I have a problem with that, because I do believe him, and I know him to be a person of his word, and there have been too many opportunities where it could be otherwise. And my hope is that you will deny the staff recommendation and that you will side with Mr. Najir under the circumstances he's outlined and you've heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Others who would like to speak to this case, please. If you would, give us your name and address. Welcome.
Hello, welcome. My name is Dylan Whitaker. I live over at 250 Formosa, North Morro Bay. I'm a friend of Patrick's. I've been around since he moved into the house. He's definitely fixed it up a lot. This whole issue started out 2 years ago, and then there was a long gap before it ever started back up again. I believe we discussed a lot of the issues with the structure. It is non-permanent, but it is expensive to move. In reality, I don't see how changing it from the side lot to further back changes anything. It's still going to be visible from the street, which was initially one of the main debates that I heard from the neighbor. I was with him on a couple of the calls for the city, so I do recall him discussing and confirming that it's a non-permanent temporary structure. He's dealt with the water issue. He's just tried his best to work with the city and make everything right. So I would like to have you guys appeal and keep the structure there so he doesn't have to face more expenses for something that won't really change much if the structure's moved.
Thank you.
That is all. Thank you.
Others who would like to speak.
Hello, I'm Janice Peters. I live in Morro Bay, former planning commissioner, councilwoman, and mayor, actually. I have known Patrick for quite some time now, and I agree he is an honest and upstanding person. And when he wanted to add this storage area to his property, he did the right thing. He went to the planning department, he presented his needs and wants, and had instruction from them, verbal, and the 2 documents that he referenced, and then proceeded to build the shed as instructed, obeying the rules as he heard them explained. Now, in the meantime, the code obviously was in flux. It had been in flux, I think, since I was on the Planning Commission. So that's a long time. Codes change all the time, little bits at a time, and finally this one, I think, has been revised completely. But he got caught in the terms changing and all of that, which I don't think is fair to him. He did everything as he was instructed at the time, and it has not caused any damage anywhere that we know of at all. And to actually move it now would cost more than the initial installation. I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but it means taking the fence out or something. There's a tree in the way, and there are, I guess, electrical stuff on the side of the building, so you can't just move it back a few feet. It has to go around. So it's not an easy thing, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and as he said, he's not working full-time because of certain health issues and does not have the money to do that easily at all. So what I'm seeing is somebody who, in all faith, did the things that they thought they were supposed to do, and now, because of things that were not his doing, just the regular machinations of the city, he is now being penalized for this and blamed for it, where in fact he is not to blame, he is innocent. And I think that in this case, given that the shed has been there without causing any trouble or damage for 18 months, 2 years now, I think it would be only fair to say that it is grandfathered in at this point and should be allowed to remain. So I hope that will be, you will uphold the appeal. Thank you.
Oh, Ms. Peters, thank you so much. And can I ask you quickly, did you have fun on the Planning Commission?
You know, it was the first thing I did within the city, and it took a lot of learning. There was a great learning curve, but it was a big help for the things I did later on the council and as mayor.
It can be hard, yeah. Thank you for making the time. Others?
Hello, I'm Ryan Garcia. I'm the neighbor, 421 Arcadia. I just have to say a couple things. One thing, I don't think it's a matter of character, you know, whether he's a nice person or not, or, I mean, the rules clearly are the rules, and the day this went up, I made complaints because it didn't belong there. It doesn't belong there, still doesn't. The fire chief came out. He basically, under the fire code, there's nothing he can do. He didn't agree with it. He says he fought against this, but he was overruled by the powers that be to allow anything like that in those areas. And fortunately, the Planning Commission decided that they shouldn't be allowed, just as they weren't before. So nothing really has changed. It wasn't legal when it was put there. It's still not legal or allowed, whatever the proper terminology is. As far as the water runoff, apparently it's helping his mold problem, but now that water is coming onto my property. And I think time will tell that, yeah, I'm going to eventually have problems. I have, you know, structures that lie below that where that water is coming, and I eventually will have problems from it. Whether it happens in 2 years or 1 year, it will eventually happen. In the meantime, he's built a second structure, which I think is conforming, except that there's no gutter on this structure at all, and now that actually is coming to my backyard as well. So there's just not a lot of consideration for the neighbor here, and I don't know what else to say other than, you know, there's rules, and I think we should be following them. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for coming. Others, please come forward, whoever would like to talk.
Hello.
Welcome.
Nancy Winters, longtime resident of Morro Bay. I live at 380 Fairview, and I've known Patrick for many years. And he is a good man, and I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to make this quick. For the last 2 years, when he first built the shed, he got the information before he built the shed that he thought to be correct, so that this would not be a problem later on. And for the last 2 years, it has affected his health. Every time I see him, he is sick over this. And I might not know all the technical terms and all, but I can tell you that when he went to the city and he was told that he was going to build a shed, he wanted to make sure it was legal, and he was told as long as it was under 120 square feet and 8 feet in height, they could be put anywhere in the backyard. And I understand the neighbors complaining about the water going into his property, but as yet, it has not happened. And the only place that it could be put would be in the back of the yard. And it would be a lot of work, like they said. Fences would have to come down, trees, and it's still going to be visible from the street. And I guess the whole point behind this is that he did get stuck in a planning commission change when he thought it was legal when he built it, and then there was a change, and he's been having trouble with that ever since. He's been told to contact the city manager, who told him all the same things about it being a temporary non-placement structure and not having the same limitations of other structures with foundations. I hope that this will settle for Mr. Najjar. As I said, it is affecting his health, and he is trying to do the right thing. So I hope that the council will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks very much for making the time. Others, please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. My name is Mrs. Kendall, and I live on Arcadia Avenue. And I don't think the original picture showed it to how it actually is. You can see it even from the side street, which is Arcadia, and it is a yellow tent, very obvious, and is not attractive. Also, nobody's brought up the fact that it's created a lot of traffic and parking problems for the people on our street. As far as this resident, I don't have anything against him. I'm sure he's a very nice man, but it is definitely an eyesore. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time. Others? Anthony, do we have any hands up in the queue? Oh, come on up.
Sorry, I'm Nessa Garcia. I'm the neighbor. Again, it is not about his character. It never was appropriate. It wasn't under the old code, and it wasn't under what is now the code. I don't care if you can see it from the front. I just don't want to be able to touch it and have it less than 4 feet from my house. And yeah, again, it's not about his character. I just want it to be appropriate. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for being here. Terry, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Terry Simons, resident Morro Bay. It was not my intention to speak to this issue tonight. I actually came here for the main event, which is objective standards. Suddenly I find myself in the midst of something that maybe benefits from some more objective standards. I've read the code. When I hear references to structures and attaching structures to buildings as accessory structures that have to meet certain building standards, one conjures up the idea that an accessory structure in that sense is a constructed building on a foundation with wood framing and a roof to match the existing roof of the building. I'm very sympathetic with the neighbor that they don't want something in that space that's next to their property but not on their property, but that's not unusual in Morro Bay. There's all kinds of side yard uses, surfboards stacked up against fences that cause fences to lean over, all kinds of other issues between neighbors. I think one of the concerns I have here is an objective standard. I don't think that the code properly addresses a fabricated plastic entity like these typical Home Depot storage units. I think that the code is trying to address accessory buildings the way the Uniform Building Code addresses them. And when I hear 120 square feet or 8 feet in height, that sounds very much like the Uniform Building Code's definition of an unpermitted or non-required permit. I would wonder if, in fact, the city's kind of perhaps inadvertently given poor information when they said if it's under 120 square feet, you don't need a permit for it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to comply with some standards. But from what I'm hearing in the testimony, it sounds as if the builder, the applicant, the property owner with the plastic shed seemed to try to come in. And I would wonder if he came in to get a permit and if there's even a process for getting a permit for these types of containment vessels. I hate to call them structures because I've built structures my whole life, and I've built some of these sheds. They're not structures, they're plastic boxes. I would consider that these plastic units sitting in a side yard are very much like the waste wheelies that most people have sitting in their side yards that you can roll out onto the street. So I don't envy your position, but I think once again we are finding ourselves working in a void, in a gap between standards that were intended to do one thing but are being applied perhaps appropriately, perhaps inappropriately to things that were really not the intention. I don't think the intention of the code was to regulate these kind of plastic structures. Thank you.
Terry, thank you very much. Others? Oh.
Make a comment on that?
You had a little time left if you want to.
I would just have to add, this is not a plastic structure that the last speaker was talking about. This was built, it was built in a day by some type of builder. It was built in a day. I assume it could be moved in a day, probably. I don't think it's that big of a deal. There's plenty of room on his property to move it, so it's not abutted up against our
Thank you.
property.
Got it. Anthony, any raised hands in the queue? Oh.
Thank you, Chair Roshan. There are currently no raised hands in the queue.
Okay, this is last chance. Would you like to speak? Please, welcome.
And thank you for the opportunity. My name is Howard Lyon. I'm a stepfather for Patrick. So I think we all agree he's a great kid, smart, intelligent, and I respect him very, very much for, in my business, some of the products actually are at the old Morro Bay Power Plant, some at New Diablo Nuclear Plant. Some of them might be in your yards of the technology I bring. And the reason I say that is that we deal with standards every day. Some are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old in our industry, and some of them have to get grandfathered in. So my challenge has been this, and I think he's a remarkable kid that I wish I had his fortitude. Not just, he's done the due diligence. He made the calls. He dug up the codes. He showed it to him. He had sent him his mother and I. We'd speak about it, and I helped him source the very, very professional person who built that shed, who has also built a very, very nice one in my backyard as well, and does it as a very, very good professional business. But I'll circle back to the standards. I'm still at this, after hearing the last gentleman talk about codes and standards and discussions and assessments and accessory buildings, and I'm confused to this day. And we deal with nuclear power plant specs, and we can't. I still am scratching my head. What is a temporary, unsupported building? It's a wood shed with wood base, and as much as I would love to have, I've already done it, is slide that to the backyard. But there's structures in the backyard in that area where it was basically custom fit based on the information that the city's departments, and no disrespect to those people, we say things all the time, but we're also people that respect and I have to honor our elected officials, our officials in these commission buildings. When we call somebody, we expect the correct answer. Sometimes it's life-saving, sometimes it's impacting decisions. And so a $3,000 structure, we basically have to destroy it and build it something else. You can't pick it unless you got a crane, and they used to be $250 an hour at a local power plant to move something with a two-week guaranteed of 24 hours a day to move a structure, because you got to put there's forklifts. That would be great if we could get it to the backyard. We can't do it with a forklift, or it already been done. I'd have done it. I'm willing to spend the money to help improve maybe the visual for the neighbors and for the other neighbors that say it might be whatever it takes, we're willing to do that. But moving the structure based on the information that he was given, that he spent time and time again calling different departments at your city to try to do the right thing, he was not able to, he built it. And I really would like to ask you to give that some serious thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Final call. Welcome. If you could tell us your name and address if you would like.
I'm Rusty Najjar. I'm Patrick's mom.
Ah.
Again, I'm going to reiterate what everybody else has said, that he did go before he built the shed to make sure that he was putting it in the right place. He did put the rain gutter up on the side, but he did it himself because they came out with all these new things saying that there's a possibility there were going to be code changes after he said they told him that he could put it there. He's willing to put up a better rain guard. His back shed is like 4 feet away from the fence. It's nowhere near the neighbors. This one, yes, it's up against. He can fix that so the rain does not go in his yard. Also, moving the shed, there's a tree in his backyard that the city won't let him cut down. So there's no way to move the shed to the back without cutting down that tree and moving some power lines to get it back there. So what they're requesting him to do is absurd. If he hadn't done all the right things, I would be on your side, but he did. And he was so excited every time he thought he was out of the woods. 18 months later, it comes up, oh, the code's changed. You have to move it, and here's your penalties. So it's just not fair. He worked very hard to do the right thing. And I'm asking you to grant him the right to keep it there.
Thank you for your words.
Thank you.
At this point, I am going to close public hearing. And commissioners, we should have questions for staff. And I would try to be as balanced as you can with your questions, as well as to Mr. Najjar. Eric.
My question for Scott. Do you have the text of the existing code that was applicable at the time 2 years ago? Or do you have, is that text?
Yes.
Can we place that on the screen by any chance? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you to do that in advance.
It's right there. This is the language related to accessory buildings. It says where an accessory building is attached to the main building, it shall be made structurally a part of and have a common roof system with the main building and shall comply in all respects with the requirements of this title applicable to the main building. Unless so attached, meaning detached, an accessory building in an R district shall meet the setback height coverage requirements of the zone and be at least 6 feet from any dwelling, existing or under construction on the same lot or any adjacent lot except temporary non-permanent buildings.
Thank you. That's my question for now.
Mike.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and ask this question. As part of staff's response on page 6, Scott, you said that revocation of administrative citation is not under the purview of the Planning Commission. So where would these citations go?
So the citations have been issued, and there's a separate process in our municipal code for contesting those sites. I think really the outcome of it, though, is sort of based on what comes out of the Planning Commission meeting this evening. Like, were the Planning Commission defined this to be an acceptable situation here, then the citations would have been issued potentially in error, and we would probably just revoke them. I mean, but that's they're not part of the decision-making process for you this evening. It's just, what's the code say, and is the shed compliant or not compliant? Okay. I would add something, if you don't mind, or in a second. I think Mr. Simons made some really salient points there, and it's pretty clear that when Mr. Najjar spoke to staff, that there was some commentary about, is a permit required? And so the discussion took place around, is a building permit required? And that's where you get the 8 feet and 120 square foot in size, because once you get to that size, you do need a building permit. Underneath that, you don't. And there is no planning permit requirement for small sheds like this.
Yeah, the distinction is about a building permit, not about a structure.
Yes, correct.
Joe.
In the file and tonight, there was a brief reference to documentation that the appellant was incorrectly informed. I didn't see anything resembling that sort of documentation in the file. To your knowledge, does that sort of documentation exist?
So I think it's pretty clear that there was a misunderstanding that took place here. I mean, that's pretty obvious to me. It was one of the things when I spoke with Mr. Najjar, so, early on in the process, I looked carefully at what the code said, and we did look at the temporary non-permanent buildings, and I said, maybe this is something we can look into because it might work for you. I actually had something similar to this in the code when I worked for the city of Pismo Beach. And so I wanted to go back and do a more thorough, code analysis in the city's codes to see if something like that might work. And in doing that, what I found is that is not the practice of the city. They require these types of things to meet setback requirements, and we had quite a few instances of that being the case. And so I was like, well, we can't do anything with that. And so we kind of fell back to, hey, the draft code's going to potentially allow it, and then we paused enforcement.
Let me, in good faith, Mr. Najjar, would you like to add anything after hearing the testimony?
In what it says right there, that except temporary non-permanent buildings, that puts it when it doesn't have a foundation, not actually a building, wasn't something that I could get a permit on.
Okay.
Couldn't do anything on those grounds, so when I was asking them the questions about where can I build this, it was under 120 square feet, 8 feet tall, anywhere in your backyard.
Okay, so there lies the confusion. Okay, thank you.
And they gave me the, what was it, page 29 or 30, that other page that included the new code, which I didn't find out was draft code until they said new code was coming in. So I had a piece of paper that said up to the lot line, like basically was saying the same thing. That everything
Got it.
I had done was correct.
No, thank you for coming up again.
All right, thank you very much.
Commissioners, I am open for a motion, and if there's any further questions, I guess I would offer, I asked Janet Peters earlier, being a planning commissioner is not always fun. And it's so interesting after a hearing like this, I really would love to be friends with Mr. Najjar. He seems like a wonderful man. But we also have to listen to his neighbor, Mr. Garcia, who has a very clear case. For me, the code issues are evident, and as a commissioner, there's great clarity there. Not that there wasn't confusion, but it was not with, from what I can see, the code issues. So that's my sort of take. Commissioners, would you have a statement you'd like to make?
I also have great empathy for Mr. Najjar and Mr. Weiss's testimony. I used to work for your dad 40 years ago at Radio Shack, so I respect your testimony as well. And those testimonies speak to the character of the humans, but unfortunately they don't respect the zoning code, and the zoning code represents all the citizens, and so we have to essentially fight for the zoning code up here, unfortunately, and the old code, in my mind, is pretty clear. What it was unclear is the draft code in the middle, and that code that might have been going forward was assumed to have been the new code, but then got changed before my tenure here, but got changed so that the shed was illegal in the new code as well as the old code, in my opinion. But in that draft interim code, it may have been legal, but that code was never actually legal. And then there's the discrepancy that Mr. Simons brought up about, well, it doesn't need a building permit, and the building permit versus zoning is two separate things. And zoning and building are very confusing, even to pretty advanced builders. And so it just comes down to me, if it was within our purview, I just heard it isn't, but if it was within our purview to rescind any fines and fees, I would suggest to the city as a planning commission that we rescind any fines on this particular application, but I can't grandfather a temporary structure. It's not, the nature of temporary isn't really something you can grandfather, and so I can't find for the appellant, I have to find with staff, I'm sorry.
Mike?
Yeah, and I gotta also kind of fall back on my role as a planning commissioner, which is to find zoning requirements, what is allowed and not allowed, and not to fall back on the character of an individual. As staff clearly stated, the shed is in violation of a municipal code, and unless the planning commission makes some other interpretation, which we can't make, then the recommendation should stand. And as Commissioner Meyer just stated, the shed would not be allowed under the old code or the new code. So there we go. So I've fallen back on everything I can as a planning commissioner and have to support staff's recommendation. That's all I'm allowed to do. So based upon that, I'll just go ahead and also agree with Commissioner Meyer that my role as a planning commissioner will be to support staff's recommendation that this does not meet the code requirements. Thank you.
Joe?
I also find the appellant extremely sympathetic, and would that we could decide this basis on the basis of competing empathy, but we can't. It's just the controlling city ordinance has one exceptions for those kinds of structures, be they temporary, and this is a long structure designed to be long-lasting. It's been there 24 months. There's no intention of removing it. It's clearly not temporary. And with respect to the misinformation that may or may not have been given and received to the appellant, I can't offer any opinion on that because I simply don't know. But as a commissioner, as the rest of the commissioners have said, we have a responsibility to enforce the applicable city law, and that's what we're doing.
Commissioners, thank you. Thank you for everybody that was here tonight. I closed public comment. I'm sorry. I'm ready for a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to support staff's recommendation to deny. Is that right, Scott?
Deny.
Deny the appeal, uphold the director's decision, and adopt
Yeah.
resolution, what is it, 10?
Yeah.
23?
Yeah. Yep, deny the appeal and uphold the director's interpretation that the shed does not comply with the 5-foot side yard setback requirements for accessory structures. Would that cover it?
But, and through adoption of resolution 10-23.
Okay, and add that.
Okay.
Thank you, that's my motion.
I would
Eric?
make a comment. Is it within our, you mentioned it is not within our purview to discuss the fines, but I strongly recommend that the city rescind the fines, and I hope my fellow planning commissioners agree with that.
I don't know if we can make that part of the motion. I think we've heard you, so.
So
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
I didn't catch that. Who was that? Oh, thank you.
We have a second.
Yeah, Commissioner Mark.
Eric is the second. Mike is the first.
Okay.
Would you poll the commission?
Yes. Commissioner Ingraffia.
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Chairperson Roshan.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. A very difficult hearing for us, but we really appreciate you being here. Thank you. I want to move directly to the new business issue. This is C1. This is the presentation of the annual water supply and demand assessment and allocation of water equivalency units, the WEUs, for fiscal year 23-24. So I invite Scott, who is going to do the presentation for us?
Damaris Hanson is going to, and as soon as I get the PowerPoint up, she should be ready to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Damaris Hanson. I'm the Utilities Division Manager, and tonight I'll be going over item C3, the annual water supply demand assessment and allocation of water equivalency units for next
Great.
fiscal year.
Very nice to have you here. Thank you.
So tonight's presentation will go over, I'll go over a water supply background, current conservation requirements, and I have Dan Heimel here with Confluence Engineering who will go over the projected water supply and the annual supply and demand assessment, and then we'll go over the water equivalency units and the recommended allocations. So the background water supply. So 95% of Morro Bay's water supply comes from the State Water Project. We are a subcontractor to San Luis Obispo County Flood Control District or Water Conservation District, or the district. The district has 25,000 acre feet of water from the Department of Water Resources, and the city and 10 subcontractors contract to deliver 4,830 acre feet and 5,707 acre feet of drought buffer. The remaining 14,463 are the district's state water allocation, and it's the district's unsubscribed allocation. This is just a depiction of the state water and how we get our water. It comes from the California Aqueduct, which comes from all the way northern California. We get it from the coastal branch, branches off, comes down Highway 46 near the intersection of 46 and 41 is Polonio Pass where the water is treated. Then comes down and goes through the Cuesta Tunnel and then branches out to Truro Valley Pipeline where we get our water from. And then about 5% of our water comes from the Morro Basin currently. The Morro Basin has 7 wells, and that's located near Lila Kaiser Park. We are permitted to extract 581 acre-feet out of the Morro Basin. This extraction right is about half of the city's water rights. Our city's demand. The city's demand is around 1,100 acre-feet a year. And Morro Basin does have elevated levels of nitrates, so this water has to be treated through the brackish water reverse osmosis plant. That picture there is a picture of one of the reverse osmosis trains. And there is some loss of water when you run it through an RO, so about 25% of our water is rejected as concentrate water. So current water conservation requirements. These winter storms of 2023 have drastically changed the drought conditions for the state and for the county of San Luis Obispo. And given that the governor changed and eased the drought restrictions in March 2023, and in doing that, the city council reduced our water restrictions in April from severely restricted to moderately restricted. So this is reduced our outdoor irrigation. It used to be allowed every 2 days a week, depending on your address, and now it's allowed every day of the week, but it is prohibited between the hours of 10 and 4. And then I'll invite Dan up for the projected water supply portion.
Chair Rosen, members of the Planning Commission, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today about the water supply prediction for 2023-2024. You know, I think as Damaris hinted at, it's been an interesting exercise preparing this updated water supply condition compared to last year. Last year we were here in the third year of the worst 3-year drought we've had on record. And this year we're here presenting 100% allocation of the state water project and historic amounts of precipitation. So I don't know what that tells us, but I guess it tells us that we need to be prepared for everything. So as I mentioned, in 2023, the DWR declared a 100% allocation of the state water project. That means that the city gets a state water allocation that includes both its water service amount of 1,313 acre-feet, plus its full drought buffer of 2,290 acre-feet per year, or a total of 3,600 acre-feet total. This far exceeds the district's and the city's anticipated demand for the upcoming year of 1,100 acre-feet, and will allow the city to put into storage in San Luis Reservoir, which is an off-stream storage reservoir on the state water project, approximately 1,800 acre-feet this year, which represents more than a full year of supply for the city in the future. So we go to the next slide. The annual water supply demand assessment is a new water code requirement from the Department of Water Resources. It's to be submitted by July 1st of every year, and the first year for that requirement was actually last year of July 1st of 2022. And it's really an evaluation, a short-term evaluation of every water utility that meets the requirements for preparing an annual water supply assessment, ability to provide water to its customers for an additional dry year. So it's a short-term water supply, water shortage planning tool that the Department of Water Resources has implemented to help make sure that utilities are planning ahead for potential future drought years and making sure that they are going to be able to have enough water to meet their customer needs, or enact additional water conservation measures so that they can keep their demands below the available supply. And so we're presenting here the city's assessment for the upcoming water year, well, fiscal year, really. And it's based on a number of conditions that we described. One, 100% allocation of state water and the allocation and the stored water that'll provide. It assumes that next year will be dry. Prudent planning requires that we assume dry conditions moving forward. So a 5% allocation next year, but again, access to that stored state water supply. It also assumes that there'll be a shutdown of the state water system. The state water system is an interruptible supply, and every year is typically taken down for maintenance in the month of November or December. Those typical shutdowns are short, approximately 2 weeks. Sometimes they extend longer than that, but it's something that we need to plan for here at the city, and that's incorporated into the water supply and demand assessment. It incorporates water availability under the Morro Basin Water Supply Permit, as Damaris mentioned, as well as it looks, and then on the demand side, it looks at, what is the potential unconstrained demand or the demand that the city's water planning documents predict will happen without water conservation measures, and then it also incorporates the current level or the current water shortage contingency level that's implemented and the associated savings from that. So all of that gets pulled together in this graph here, which is a graph of the anticipated water supply available in each month in the upcoming fiscal year. And what we're really looking for here is the blue line represents the anticipated demand for that month within the city, and you can see it varies throughout the year, which is typical seasonal demand patterns that we see not only here in Morro Bay, but elsewhere in California, with lower demands in the winter as landscape irrigation and or tourism water demands decrease. We're comparing that blue line to the colored columns, and what we want to see is the colored columns above the blue line indicating sufficient or greater supply to meet the anticipated demand in those months. And what you'll see is the blue represents state water allocation, healthy state water allocation to meet the majority of the demand for the rest of this year. And then moving into next year, assuming we have a dry year, a 5% state water allocation, the city would then turn to its stored state water in San Luis Reservoir to meet its demands. The orange represents the available groundwater from the Morro Basin. That is available every month should the city need it, and then also available in a larger quantity in November to account for the state water shutdown. And that concludes the annual water supply demand assessment presentation.
Thank you. So next we have the water equivalency units. So a little background on the water equivalency units. It was a citizen-adopted measure, Measure F, in 1984. It is a growth management system. It was enacted to regulate the addition of new water users into the city's system. And it is to ensure that the demand for water does not exceed the available water supply. So a WEU is a measurement of water use equal to the amount of water used by a single-family residence over a period of 1 year. So that amount of water is equal to 0.2 acre-feet, which is based on the assumption of 90 gallons per capita per day and 1.9 persons per unit. And these water equivalency units are issued at planning permit time. So in order to determine if WEU should be issued, the city looks at its long-term future water reliability. So with the city did this with the performance of the water service reliability forecast that was done with the urban water management plan. So this plan looked at a hypothetical 5-year drought scenario based on real-world data from the worst-case 5-year conservative drought period on record. This is going to look at your complete build-out and what the demand and available water would be at that time. So the forecast showed that the city, through its state stored water and future IPR program, would have enough sufficient water reliability to provide water during this scenario. This further demonstrates that there is available water for future development, including new development that requires a WEU. So last fiscal year, City Council allocated 115 WEUs for development, and this fiscal year, only 1 WEU was issued. So as of note, this is not a comprehensive list of all building activity. This only requires for a single-family residence or multifamily residence when it's being developed on an empty lot, or if it's being proposed as some changing of an office building to apartment or apartment to a restaurant or something to that effect. Therefore, the staff recommends the Planning Commission recommends to City Council receive and file the findings and strategies resulting from the annual water supply and demand assessment, and allocate 50 WUs for residential development, 30 for single family, 20 for multifamily, and 60 for commercial development, for a total of 115 WUs for fiscal year 23-24. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I want you both to know this is one of my favorite meetings of the year when I get to hear from you guys. This is really, really fun. And thank you for the good news, too. That's very exciting. Questions, commissioners? Eric?
I have a number of diverse questions, sorry, in advance. My first question is, maybe it's for Dan, I'm not certain if it's for you. When last year we had, what is it, 5% from the State Water Project? This is what we were allocated. Instead of our 100, we were allocated 5, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And then, was there any projection, this is just for the sake of discussion, was there any projection as to what the allocation might be had there been a continued drought?
I don't know that the Department of Water Resources puts out a specific projection, but I think what we've seen in the past is if you have a very low allocation year and then you have a low precipitation year, you would anticipate another low allocation year because the system has used up all its available storage, and it's really only what can be delivered based on the meager rainfall you would get in an additional drought year.
Okay, and then so this question is for you, Damaris. The water equivalency units, rather, those are issued every year, I suspect. Are those do those expire at the end of the year, or do they stack up, the unused ones stack up to be used in the future?
They do not expire and they don't accumulate. The measure allows you to issue this many a year and the percentages of how many should go to commercial and residential.
So I guess that's not very clear to me. So we used up one out of the number we were allocated. What happens to the balance of them? Do they sit there as potential development, or do we restart again a year later based on the new information from a year later?
Yeah, they and it is kind of confusing, but they don't accumulate. So next year, if however many gets allocated, that's how many you have
fresh.
to allocate.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you. And then with respect to pulling water out of the Morro Bay Basin, because of the salinity, you guys put it through, or whatever it is, you put it through the RO process. Some percentage of the RO goes out to the ocean, 25% the brine. And is that number controlled by the Coastal Commission? Are we allowed to, in other words, can we increase our water supply by pumping more, or do we then have to go to the Coastal Commission for a larger downstream brine discharge?
So the amount of water that we pull out of the Morro Basin is regulated by our water rights permit. The amount of brine discharge is actually, that's the process of the RO. It has a certain amount of concentrate water that is discharged.
Are we allowed an unlimited amount of brine to go to the ocean? Is that
yeah, the permit doesn't regulate us. Well, actually it does, but it's more than what we would exceed by the amount of water that we could pull out of the basin.
Okay.
For that discharge of that water, yeah.
And here's the big random question. There's a water company known as the Morro Bay Mutual Water Company, which predates the city of Morro Bay, and it was the power plant site, PG&E in the beginning, and then it's gone through Duke and Vistra. I believe it's controlled by PG&E still. What are the agreements between that? Those wells belong to that company are very adjacent to the Lila Kaiser wells, and we're pumping water from our WRF Water Resources facility down into the ground. What's the agreements between the city of Morro Bay and that mutual independent privately held water company?
I don't know of any agreements that we have between us for it. When we got our water rights permits, we were allowed to pull out 881 acre feet, given the stream flows.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what happens if they start pumping enormous amounts of water to be sold? Does that ever enter into the equations with you guys?
I would imagine they would have some sort of water rights permits for how much they're allowed to pull out as well. I don't know if, Dan, you know more history on that. in that
Yeah.
particular area.
I don't have any additional history on that.
My concern is essentially the development that's on that site in the future, whatever that may be, perhaps could participate in the Morro Bay Mutual Water Company rather than the City of Morro Bay Water. And I just am kind of curious how that would affect the city's management, let's say, of development based on water resources, given that our WRF dollar is being spent going down into the ground, or then able to be sucked up by a private company and sold off for future development. Maybe it's not even your question. And maybe I'm just pontificating at this point, and I should stop because it's not really a question. But thanks. Let's see what other questions I have. I think I have one more. No, the rest of it is comments.
Okay. Mike. I'll leave Dan and Damaris, is that it? Okay, why don't we put up that graph again that shows, where that blue line is and what's under it and what's over it. And yeah, that one right there, very interesting. So our goal is to be above the blue line, right? Based upon what Dan said, right?
Correct.
Okay. I lived in the Bay Area for 50 years, and one of the ways we dealt with our water issues was by diversifying our sources of water, right? That means we use recycled water, and we look to diversify in recycled water. We actually participated in a water bank, a special water bank, not the San Luis Obispo Reservoir. This was a special water bank where you could just bank your water and pull it when you want it. So I guess what I'm trying to get at, when I see that blue line and I see where we're at in 2420, and I just assume the worst case scenario. Our water situation isn't going to get better. I assume it's only going to get worse, especially with what's going on with developments and business and requiring more and everything else. So are there opportunities for us to diversify our water sources? Right now, we're getting 95% from the State Water Project and 5% from other sources. That's not very diversified. What I'm saying is if the State Water Project really takes a major dive like it almost did, if we had gone through one more year of a drought, we'd have nothing coming from the State Water Project, just about. So are there opportunities for us to diversify in other areas, such as recycled, such as banking water somewhere else other than San Luis, or teaming up with other cities and doing a regional approach to water management? Because that's what we did in the Bay Area, and they're thriving because we did do that. We did diversify our sources of water. So it doesn't seem like that's happening very well here. That's just a general question and comment. Are there opportunities?
There are opportunities. I'll let Dan go on it. That's something we're coming up to pretty quickly here that we're going to bring up, but I'll let Dan go.
Yeah, actually, I think the two opportunities that you highlight are two major initiatives that the city's working on. Obviously, the completion of the WRF program and construction of the IPR components provides that recycled water, that drought-proof, local, resilient water supply that the city can turn to enhance recharge to the Morro Basin during drought years and or during potential natural disasters when the state water deliveries are interrupted. And so, obviously that's a program that's being actively developed right now and is anticipated to come online in 2025. But the other thing that the city's looking at, San Luis Reservoir provides a great opportunity to store water for additional drought years, but the city, along with all the other San Luis County state water subcontractors and state water contractors throughout the state also lose a lot of water to spills at San Luis Reservoir. In a year like this, San Luis Reservoir spilled, and the district, along with its subcontractors, lost over 10,000 acre-feet of water that it wasn't able to take delivery of. So through partnerships with other state water contractors that have groundwater banking programs, have the ability to take surface water in wet years when there's surpluses available and put it into groundwater or other storage mechanisms so that you can access it during drought years is something that the city and its staff is actively exploring with the the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District.
Okay, so given that, those responses, you hit two of my diversified sources of water. And obviously, those aren't built into the chart right now, right? They're not part of that chart. So if we were to move on these initiatives and really get aggressive, because we need to get aggressive, then obviously that chart would change just a little bit to reflect a better source of water in future years, right? If we had done those things. Because obviously we're planners, we're planning for this, you know, and I think that based upon that, you know, I'd be more than happy to move this to council, but with a couple recommendations that we move on those initiatives, right? Because we can't wait, because water is not something that's guaranteed. And in fact, I can guarantee you this, it's only going to get tougher to get. So let's move on those initiatives, okay? That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Mike. Joe?
Okay.
Dan, I think I heard you say that we can expect to have 1,800 acre feet in the reservoir at the end of next year, if expectations are met, something like that. Is that pretty much the maximum that we can store there, or could we, if we had other good years, could we store more there?
That is the maximum that you're allowed to store under the current state water contracts. But if you had other places to put that water, the city would, at the end of this year, have an additional 700 acre feet that it's not going to take delivery of, that it can't store in San Luis Reservoir, that it could put to a longer-term storage program.
Yeah.
And that is all of that 1,800 acre feet actually available? It's kind of a strange question to ask, but given the demands for water everywhere, I mean, is that a real number, or is it somehow qualified by, but, you know?
So that 1,800 acre foot is a real number. I mean, it is a number that the city and other state water contractors can count on. There's very tight accounting of what goes into and out of San Luis Reservoir, and so that stored water is preserved. One advantage of putting water in San Luis Reservoir is there aren't any evaporation losses. And to be honest, I don't know how exactly they do that, but they don't charge the state water subcontractors for that. And I think they account for that in their inputs and their outtakes. So yeah, it is a reliable number until you get a wet year and that water spills. But in the city's case, because of its significant drought buffer, if it's a wet enough year that San Luis Reservoir is going to spill, that means that there's a healthy allocation that year, and the city would then be able to generate additional storage in San Luis Reservoir.
Can I just make one more comment?
Sure, Mike, go ahead.
So just to clarify, so we 1,800 in San Luis Reservoir, right? We can put, or pull up to 1,800, right? Okay, good. But we have the potential to bank another 700 if we were to partner up and find another place to put our water in order to pull it when we need it, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Right, Dan?
Yep.
Good. So that's, I just want to clarify again that, so we could potentially get another 700 acre feet of water if we were to manage our water so that we could bank it somewhere else that's why I started with that, other than San Luis, because that's the contract, 1,800. So we could potentially have another 700 acre feet somewhere else if we could partner up and bank it somewhere else where they have the capacity to store it for when we need it. So that's the really magic number. 700 is what we could do in addition to what we're doing now as far as banking. But we could also recycle and generate a more local source that's dependable. Is that about right? Oh, got it.
Yep.
That's what working in the industry for 20 years has taught me. Okay, good.
My question, Scott, just to make sure you're like actively listening. How do we use this at the planning department in terms of future growth? And when do we hit a threshold where that becomes an issue?
Well, we're probably going to be looking at how we deal with the water allocation, water equivalency unit process in the future, because I don't know that it really does a lot right now. Again, as Damaris indicated, we do allocate those with the issuance of planning permits for new water equivalency unit using things like a new house.
Yeah.
We don't issue them for like ADUs, and there's reasons in state law for that. But we do issue those or pieces of them for like multifamily housing and those types of things. That's when they get issued, and we just happen to have only one issued this last year related to one new home. Most of the stuff was additions and remodels, and we didn't have new, commercial things coming online, that type of thing that came in online this year.
Interesting. So there's not an urgency yet.
There's more of an urgency to, I think, do some of the things that we're doing now. Diversification of our water supply, huge. Finishing off the IPR piece of the water reclamation facility project, huge. And then looking at what that looks like in the future, and then the storage options that Dan was talking about. I mean, those are all good things the city's doing, and that will help diversify our water portfolio, which is, like you were saying, Commissioner Rodriguez, that's a needed thing. And so it's good the city's looking at those things.
I like it. Damaris and Dan, can you stay for a few minutes? I'd like to open up to public comment, and there might be some questions. Would anybody like to comment? Terry.
Yes, sir. Terry Simons, Morro Bay. 40-year worker in the water resources management arena. I've developed numerous small subdivisions, so I have a lot of experience with small water companies and community water systems. In those programs, we don't have the advantage generally of using state water. We have to be self-reliant. So I've developed water strategies around that sort of self-reliance, and the number one strategy is storage. Typically, your resources are limited either by the pumping capacity of the wells that you have or whatever your other source of water might be. So I would really encourage, really encourage the city of Morro Bay to maximize and accelerate its programs to develop much greater storage of water, particularly, oddly enough, its current reclaiming water. Right now, we're dumping, I don't know what the numbers are, but they're huge. The processed water that's coming out of the recently finished plant is basically just being dumped back in the ocean, and that's very expensive water. Now, not as expensive as it would be to turn it into potable water, but still it's very expensive water we're just wasting. We need to find contractors or sources of people that will take that water and utilize the revenue stream from that to our advantage. And the other thing is in terms of additional resources, historically, Morro Bay got its water for many years from the Chorro Valley. And I was very disappointed to hear recently, and I don't have any verification of this, but that for all practical purposes, the city has abandoned its wells that it still owns, I believe, in the Chorro Valley. And in fact, looking at the decline of the nitrate values in the Chorro Valley compared to the non-decline of the nitrate values in the Morro Valley, it would appear to me that the upstream areas of the Chorro Valley would be a much better place to inject our reclaimed water if we were able to and willing to reactivate our uses of the pumps and wells that we historically had in the Chorro Valley. All the physical facilities are all there. There's very little needed to make those connections, but somebody needs to tell the council, and the council needs to direct its public works staff to look into this. I would be very frustrated to hear that we have totally abandoned that opportunity. And lastly, of course, we just need to not take the state at their word that the water is going to be available. San Luis Reservoir is a bank, and like any bank, if there's a run on the bank, it's going to be, where's the water going to go? Despite all the rigorous accounting and stuff, when the scramble comes for the water, we could easily become like the farmers in the Central Valley that were basically just told, sorry.
Terry, thank you. You're in luck. Councilmember Landrum was listening intensely. So.
Betty, welcome. Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to draw your attention to the next to the last page and the next to the last paragraph. And it was stated orally that this only covers projects that are single-family apartments and commercial. And I think at some point, we need to have in real time, know how much is actually being used or has been used on all these unhosted hotels, on the regular hotels, on our vacation rentals, on additions to houses. This does not cover the use that we've used to consume this water. And so I think that that paragraph right there is telling us that we need to find out in real time how much water do we really use, or how much is available every year. On top of that, I'd like a clarification, because when we talk about 5% of our state water, it's my understanding that it's 5% of the county's allocation. It's 5% of the 25,000 acres, not 5% of our 3,000. And so I don't know if someone can clarify that. And if that's true, then we're actually giving, even at 5%, we're still getting 1,200 acres a year, which is how we survive. And one of the reasons that the public voted for state water back in the 90s is because our wells here were unsatisfactory in terms of odor, smell, taste, that whole thing, and that what we got from state water was much purer and more palatable. And so I think that's a piece that needs to be looked at as well. And seems like, yeah, and our banking, obviously, to Mr. Rodriguez's point, is the San Luis Reservoir, and I hear that we are needing to do more storage. But another component besides storage, as has been stated, is that conservation. And Morro Bay has always been excellent at conservation. And so I think that needs to be a piece of the pie as well. Thank you.
Scott, can you respond to is Betty accurate in the count in terms of hotels and rentals?
So
the exclusion of that.
Yeah. So we know exactly how much water we use, and Damaris can speak to that every year. Specifically, how much vacation rentals and hotels. I don't know that we monitor those individually.
But that's part of the residential number.
Well, we know the total amount of water that we use every year. Like individual hotels are already permitted and already have, I guess, assigned water equivalency units, if you want to call it that. I mean, they already have their allocation of water. So we only assign them to new uses, and that's on top of what our historic use is. And I'll let Damaris, maybe clean up what I just said.
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, we do know how much complete total water demand we have, and then, yeah, we can break it up into whether it's a single family or hotels or whatever, but those aren't the WUs that we're issuing now because they're not a new water use.
Got it.
If it was I don't know, some other, like a retail building that would change to a hotel, there would be a WU associated with that.
Got it.
There's a more of a water demand.
Makes sense. And to Betty's other question around the percentage?
It is not the county's percentage. It's the city's allocation that you get 5% of, and then we have a drought buffer above that.
Okay. Thank you. Others? Zara, welcome.
Thank you. I just thought it would be helpful for regarding banking and diversifying, if maybe Mr. Heimel could answer what the possible capacity that we can get with the IPR would be, and also address the Chorro Valley basin issues.
Dan, would you want to speak to that?
Yes, I can address those two questions. So in terms of the capacity of the IPR, one of the limiting factors is how much wastewater is available. So, I think some of the numbers that have been put out there for the IPR program capacity are up to 825 acre feet. And it's important to remember or realize that that's a build-out number. That's city at build-out generating build-out amounts of wastewater. And so because of the city at its current level of development has lower levels of wastewater, I think the current estimates that we have, if the city were to look to maximize and gather every drop it could of its wastewater, it could potentially generate somewhere around 625 acre-feet of recycled water for injection into the Morro Basin. With respect to the Chorro Basin, this was before my time supporting the city with its water wastewater systems, but there was, extensive analysis that went into looking at both the Morro and Chorro basins as a location for injection of advanced purified water. And I would point people towards the 2019 final water reclamation facility plan that was developed, and it has it as a good summary of why at that time the city leadership and staff moved forward with the Morro Basin, and it really references 3 limitations associated with the Chorro Basin. The first one is a lack of physical infrastructure. There are elevated nitrate concentrations in the Chorro Basin as well as the Morro Basin, but in the Morro Basin, the city has this brackish water RO facility, so it has the ability to remove those nitrates before they reach a customer's tap at levels above the safe drinking water level or the maximum contaminant level. There currently is no infrastructure to treat water coming out of the Chorro Basin wells so that it's safe to serve to customers, and so additional drinking water side infrastructure would have to be constructed. Now, as nitrate levels trend, as was referenced earlier, that could change, but that is a limitation that the city currently does not have the ability to treat that water to the level that it can serve its customers without additional investments in drinking water infrastructure. The second limitation associated with the Chorro Basin was with respect to legal and water rights. There are a number of rural residential and agricultural users that pump water out of the Chorro Basin, and the city has no legal framework to limit their extractions from the basin. And so the concern was that IPR water could be put into the basin, but not necessarily be made available or be there and available to the city to extract. Now, Planning Commission member Meyer points out that there is one other pumper in the Morro Basin, but the scale of that pumping, at least as of today, is much smaller than what occurs in the Chorro Basin with the amount of agriculture that is performed in that valley. And then the third reason was the regulatory restrictions on the city's ability to extract water from both of those basins. The city has surface water rights permits for both basins. However, the constraints associated with those permits are much different. In the Morro Basin, the water rights permit has an annual capacity and a monthly capacity limit, but it doesn't have a limit associated with stream flow in Morro Creek. That's not the same for the Chorro Basin. There are annual limits in the Chorro Basin, but there are also limits associated with the amount of water flowing within Chorro Creek. And when the amount of water flowing in Chorro Creek drops below a certain threshold, I want to say it's 1.4 CFS.
Something similar to that, I don't remember exactly.
The city can no longer extract any water from its wells, even if it had injected water, recycled water into that basin. And unfortunately, when does the flow in Chorro Creek drop below 1.4 CFS? During the dry summer months, during extended droughts, when the city would really be needing to access that reliable source of supply.
Wow. Councilmember Landrum, was that, wow, what an answer, yeah.
Wow. Well, Dan, while you're there, can I ask a clarification question? Just if it's okay with the chair.
Oh, yeah, please.
This is the other thing I forgot that we used to do. Okay, say we were to get that additional 700 acre feet with partners, and we didn't need the water, but we could sell it to people who do, right? Our council just went through a budget session, which required a lot of tough decision-making. That could create a potential revenue source, right? If we didn't need the water, we could sell it to others who do.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah,
correct?
Yes, yeah, that is. And so that is one of the strategies that the city's evaluating. You know, as we point out this year, 1,800 acre feet of water to put in the storage, another 700 acre feet that could go somewhere else or could go towards cost recovery.
Yep.
Now, this has been a bit of a historic precipitation year. You know, you might have to pay somebody to take your water in a year like this, but I think there are many other years when we have above average amount of precipitation.
Yeah.
If the city had sufficient supply and its IPR program online as an insurance policy against future droughts, that it could create opportunities to sell excess water.
One of the things I learned while working for the state of California is that we're never going to be out of a drought. The state of California is in a constant drought somewhere in California. In other words, we're always going to be in a drought. So we're never going to leave that state. So it's just a matter of finding that potential buyer of our water if we had more than we needed.
Yeah, I would just add with, you know, the 2014 legislation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the need to bring many of the, well, all of the basins need to come into sustainability. Many of them have consistent overdraft. The need for that water, the demand for that water is going to be there in greater amounts than we have seen historically.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah. Wow, how much fun is this?
Yeah.
So, other questions? Any other public comment? Anthony, do we have anybody in the queue with a raised hand?
Thank you, Chair Roshan. We currently have no raised hands in the queue.
Well, a big thank you, Damaris and Dan. Any final comments?
Yeah, I was just
Motions?
going to, you know, the conclusion here was to staff recommends that Planning Commission recommend to City Council receive and file findings and strategies resulting from the annual water supply and demand assessment. And number two, but I would add that these initiatives, you know, the things that the city's trying to do, that we put a lot of aggressive action into doing those things in order to create more water and capacity and possibly even revenue for our city. As well as Betty brought up a good point, and conservation's got to be something we live with. So let's not lower the threshold for conservation. I say we raise it. Let's conserve more than we've ever conserved and have that water so when we really need it, then we'll know how to live with it, with what we need.
Scott, is there any reason we should not incorporate words to that effect into the motion?
Be good if we could make them kind of specific,
Yeah.
so I can get agreement from all of you on it.
I can do that.
Yeah.
So I would say let's.
So you're making a motion?
Yeah, I'm going to make the
We're
motion.
not ready for that yet.
Hang on.
Oh,
We have a
okay,
lot
go
more
ahead.
discussion. No, we have some more discussion.
Oh, okay.
At least
Go ahead, please, Eric, yeah.
So Measure F is 1984, and if you remember Morro Bay in the 70s and 80s, there was quite a bit of development going on, enormous compared to today. I mean, 10, 15, 20 times more than today. And so that was a reaction to that development. And it specified by voter initiative, you know, a certain amount of water to go to multifamily and a certain amount to go to single family and a certain amount to go to commercial. And now in the intervening 40 years, development has significantly dropped. Simultaneous to that, occupancy in Morro Bay has significantly dropped. 25% of the homes in Morro Bay are vacant because they're second or third or fifth homes for people. And I actually brought my little chart here to show you, and I gave one to staff to put on the screen if they can, but this is from the city's website, and it shows the change in the number of housing units over time from the 70s through the 2010. And it also shows the change in the population. And basically all I'm trying to say is that you were earlier, Damaris, mentioning 1.9 people per house. Was that per unit? I think that was the number you used. And is that the city's actual occupancy at this point, 1.9 per, I don't remember the exact number of people per house in Morro Bay, or is that just the number that we use for the water department?
It is just under 2.
Yeah, okay. I guess what I'm leading up to is that we because of Measure F, plan for a lot of single-family homes that essentially never actually get built, and we're required to spend a certain amount of our water dollars, our water allocations on properties that don't actually ever get built. And then these new state, like SBX or SB whatever, all the different SB housing
Bills.
law that's come down, are those affected by our own local water allocation Measure F, or which trumps? Do you guys know whether Measure F trumps any of those SBs, or does the SBs?
So if a project came in underneath those, they would only be able to build based on our water allocation, as far as I know. I mean, that maybe there's, some legal analysis that would need to take place, but I do think that's the case.
And the council can't change that. It would be up to a voter initiative to change the allocation as defined by Measure F.
I believe so.
Yeah, okay. So it seems unfortunate that we're restricted by a document drafted in a completely different time with a completely different planning effort. And I guess part of my thought with respect to any motion that might be made would be to, at the city council level, start thinking, or at least a higher level than us, start thinking about allocating water towards multifamily as a priority rather than single family, because the majority of the new 25% of the new single family goes to somebody who doesn't live here. And it's just, we might reallocate, I'm not saying a huge reallocation, but some other allocation that might be more sensitive to multifamily, which is what we really need in this community. And I'll leave that subject there.
Joe.
I appreciate your concern, I really do, but am I correct in that we never come close to exhausting either one of those allocations?
That is correct.
Yeah. Yeah, so I agree with you that it's unbalanced, but the reality is too that no one's not getting to build something because they can't get it, yeah. And then just back to well, and I'll leave it, it's just pontification at this point.
Yeah, I'd like to get a motion.
Yes, so I was going to make the
let's-
motion.
Let's go.
So I was going to make the motion to receive and file staff findings, as well as add from the Planning Commission that we support and, if possible, accelerate the recycled water project, as well as look at the potential of water banking with partners, where we could save a potential another 700 acre-feet of water. So I'm going to keep it nice and slim. Is that about right, Scott? So we talked about those two things with Dan, about supporting the recycled water project, whatever that is, I don't know that, and then look at the potential of banking another 700 somewhere else other than San Luis.
So, Mike, you're supporting staff's point 1 and point 2 and adding point 3. Can you say it again, or can Scott say it?
I'll let Scott say it.
I think you wanted to encourage and support the acceleration of the recycled water project, that's already underway, probably moving about as fast as it can.
Okay.
Seek recycled water partners and options for the additional 700 acre feet, so we're not losing that in the future.
Yeah.
I would expand the partners to outside of this jurisdiction, this county, but even beyond this county, the Monterey County, or another surrounding counties, because they have facilities that we may not have that are, like, for instance, like San Antonio, that has capacity still, but if there was connections, we could use.
Is that a doable thing?
I would imagine they're already looking at some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of that stuff we're bringing to council in August, so.
Okay. But it's okay to make the recommendation then?
I think it supports what's happening. That's good.
So that's a friendly amendment? Are you good, Mike?
Yeah.
Are you making the second?
Yes, second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Scott, would you poll the commission?
Commissioner Ingraffia.
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Meyer.
Yes.
Chairperson Roshan.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
A big thank you, Damaris and Dan. That was really, really fun. We're going to take a 5-minute break, everybody, and be back at 8 o'clock.
Perfect.
Invite you back up to the podium, please.
You better have some answers to this one.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I know. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. I'd like to introduce the case number. This is Plan Morro Bay Zoning Code Amendment, Objective Design Standards. And we have guests tonight with us for presentation. Scott, do you want to orchestrate how we might go about this?
Yeah, we do have a presentation. We kind of listened to the commentary that we received last time, and I think there was some, concern about why we were doing this in the first place, and so tailored some of the presentation to address those specific concerns. We'll touch a little bit on the legislative, bills that are out there that, require objective design standards. Go into, answering the question of why we're doing this and where we derived the standards from, and maybe what some other folks out there are doing as it relates to objective design standards. With that, I'm going to turn it over to, we have Kimmy Nguyen and Randy Ruslam with RRM, and Kimmy's going to give the presentation.
Great. Would you say your names one more time for us?
I'm Kimmy Nguyen.
Are you on?
I'm Randy Russin with RM Design Group.
I'll try to
Welcome.
speak into the mic. I'm pretty soft-spoken, so thank you, commissioners.
It's probably best if you can speak right into the microphone for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm figuring out the setup. Thank you, commissioners, for having us back. We saw you in May to kind of introduce the objective design standards to the public. We've been at work on various housing element implementation items for the last year, 2 years, of which objective design standards is one. We've also taken a look at your density bonus regulations and accessory dwelling unit regulations, trying to bring that up to compliance with what the state is mandating. I know it's kind of a flurry of new legislation. The pace is all something we're getting used to. So I'll try to be as clear about what the mandates are from the state tonight and where Morro Bay has kind of discretion to choose its own destiny for residential development. So just to briefly go over the agenda, we will have a little more detailed overview of the applicability of objective design standards, which projects are eligible. Not every project will be eligible under state law. So just so you can be in the know about that, we will talk a little bit about objectivity and design, which is, I think, kind of always a tricky topic. Design is very personal in how you experience it, and so the words we have to articulate about architecture and site design, sometimes come up short, it feels like. And then we'll actually discuss the draft of objective design standards we have before you today. Nothing's changed from last time, so hopefully you've had a little more time to sit with it. We've reviewed, the few comments we've gotten from the public, who's also had a little more time to see them at this point. And then we'll have a discussion of those standards and then talk about kind of what we can do next to move forward.
So can I ask, I don't ask for you to repeat the presentation from last time. Is that okay? Is there a way to just sort of deal with highlights? Everybody heard it, right? Except me. What do you think? Is there a way to do that, Kimmy?
I can do whatever will help this group best digest the information. We built on the presentation from last time because it felt like we had not adequately addressed everything that was being brought forth in public comment, so we just wanted to
Okay,
kind of
let's give it a
do
try.
a little more. So just to reiterate, new state laws coming down from the legislature are requiring a streamlined ministerial process for qualifying residential and mixed-use projects. In order to come into compliance, the city does need to adopt objective standards that would apply to these projects. And to be clear, these different laws place limits on what local jurisdictions can use to say yes or no to a project. So if you're under these qualifying eligible projects, as an applicant, you can expect a city will not pull out kind of subjective guidelines that are hard to quantify in order to deny your project.
So let me try this. To make this even harder for you, is it okay if we interrupt you with questions as you're going along and try to focus like where our edges are, commissioners? Would that help? Or would you rather like listen? Okay, so is that all right with you guys?
There's kind of like two parts to the presentation, so maybe I get through the first part, which talks about kind of the background. We'll have a discussion, and then we can go through the presentation part about the draft standards.
Okay.
And then we'll, that might just be faster.
Okay, what kind of time are you looking at? Any idea?
Sorry?
For your presentation, you're looking at how much time, do you think?
15 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go. Thank you.
Okay. This slide on process, so the city adopted your housing element, and then the Department of Housing and Community Development then certified it. So the objective design standards are a follow-up to that housing element effort, basically. So as I said before, we've covered ADUs, we've covered density bonus, we've covered inclusionary housing fees. Objective design standards are kind of one portion under that larger scope to refine the regulations and bring them into compliance with the state. So just to reiterate again, the city has stated its short-term goals and short-term actions that it's going to pursue in order to address economic vitality and housing in the city. So I got these straight from the city website. Those things include facilitating a wide range of more affordable housing units, implementing housing by right and objective design guidelines, and then updating, as I said, those numerous housing topics to come into compliance. The specific implementation item from the housing element, I won't read it all for you here, but it reads, to ensure affordable multifamily projects meet city goals, the city will continue to implement objective project reviews to promote flexibility in development standards, height parking setbacks, and more, and will continue to promote the use of density bonuses and incentives made available by the state. So the implementation action clearly kind of lays this out as this is on the city's to-do list, and it also gives a time frame for revisiting these standards every 2 years. I think it's biannual, in case the commission or the city council or members of the public wish to tweak or address any issues that come up. So the stated goals of objective standards by the state are really to establish consistent design expectations for new residential and mixed-use projects, to avoid ambiguity and uncertainty, and to reduce project costs and long timelines. That's kind of the heart of what we're trying to get to, and the hopefully improvements we're trying to make to these project processes. So again, just trying to get through objective versus subjective. Subjective regulations can include personal preferences. They can result in uncertain outcomes, and sometimes they result in longer review timelines and costs. As if you talk to any of your applicants, they might be able to tell you. Objective regulations, while not perfect, they should aim to involve no personal judgment from any decision maker. So the sort of like when I was in a city planning office, we used to joke that if you pointed to one standard in the zoning code, if you asked 3 different planners, would you get 3 different answers? That sort of thing is not going to fly with our objective standards, so we're trying to make them as tight and clear and measurable as possible. So the state is continuing to expand where and when it wants to apply these objective standards. It's mostly in the case of housing, accessory dwelling units, but the state has continued to make these different carve-outs for which projects will be eligible. I won't spend too much time on this slide. It was at the last presentation as well, but this is just an example of something where we've taken existing design guidelines and we've done our best to try to make it more quantifiable and measurable, so that when an applicant comes forward, the applicant, the city planner, the community member can all agree on what the goal of the stated standard is. For the above one, it's a guideline. We might disagree on what is a long, unarticulated roof plane. So we just try to put it into words that are going to be measurable. So we got a few questions on, does the city actually have to adopt these objective design standards? The short answer is no. No one's forcing you from the state to adopt these, but there are state mandates that call for objective review of these types of eligible projects. So in the case, if and when those projects come forward, the city not having objective standards becomes a bit of a problem, because then you're just relying on everything that's currently in your existing zoning code to do that work for you. So your existing zoning code has objective standards, say for things like maximum building height, for setbacks, for residential density, even for parking spaces. Like those things are all objective. They would affect the project.
So Kimmy, I'm going to ask a quick question. With these standards, there's 2 points. One is to address the state housing bills. The other would be if we apply them to residential projects in our city. The reason that you just stated that we need to do them, could you go over that one more time? Joe and I weren't clear on it.
Yeah, so I'll try to say it a little more clearly. So the state has the legislature has passed all these different bills through the Assembly and the Senate. SB 35 and SB 330 are the big ones that really impact a lot of cities' development. And those bills say when a project goes through the planning department, they need an objective set of standards to rely on. That's all you get. You don't get the top design guideline here, where you get to kind of negotiate with the city planner. What does this mean? How does this make you feel? How does it make the neighbors feel? That subjective process is not allowed by the state. So I hope that makes a little more sense.
I think what they're asking is whose rules apply if we don't have objective.
I think I can help with that a little bit, but no rules apply if you don't have objective design standards, is what the answer is. to expedite the review processes of these housing projects primarily. The subjective component, what we've always done is ARCs and design reviews and stuff we've come to use as our standard in all the cities for the last 30 years. Unless they are written objectively, and as Kimmy pointed out, some of your zoning code is, like parking standards, that's a great example of an objective design standard. If it is not written like that, then it's out the door. It doesn't apply at all, and so whatever is presented in front of you is what you get. There is no review by some reviewing body or public comment, or whether that fits in our city or not. And there are many cities.
So just to get a little clarity, and I want to bring Scott in on this, these are suggestions by the state, but this is what most cities are now going to in a way to have some sort of specific influence around any kind of design input, which used to be done through public hearings, through planning commissions, public comment. Now it's going to be done just through objective design standards. That's the encouragement from the state, because this is an administrative process.
That's what the legislature is doing with the many, many housing bills that are out there, and they all use a similar formula. They might be trying to get at different things: mixed-use project, use of existing commercial areas in town for residential development, those types of things. But they all have the piece with it that says yes, but you can only apply objective design standards for those things, and that's where we had the hole in our ordinances.
Right, and so that's your only influence. But what Kimmy and Ray were just saying is, if you overstep that, then what happens? In other words, if your objective design standards seem somewhat subjective, like what's the scale of influence?
Well,
Is that not the right way to ask?
I think really, if maybe you're asking the consequences if you're not adhering solely to objective standards, and the city's new zoning code has a lot of objective things in it related to design, actually.
Right.
But it also has a lot of things that are kind of subjective too. So,
right.
And they, did a good job teasing out those pieces. You'll see many, many references in the objective design standards to existing policy language that's in our current codes, our draft ones at Coastal, that that say, hey, we're pulling and making these ones more objective so we can use them where we have holes, is kind of what I would take away from that.
And so let's say, who challenges that? Who makes that decision?
The developer who comes forward with the project.
Through a lawsuit or what?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So the logic is that someone has decided that a plethora of lawsuits will be somehow more expeditious than relying on the more traditional concept meeting and planning commission.
Got it.
And just based on the last meeting we had, if a developer comes forward and they understand the law and they know about objective design standards and have applied them to their project, and we don't have those objective design standards, then they get to go with what they come forward with, right? In other words, they can't be challenged if they've met the requirements of the law, right? If we don't have those standards, they can come forward with what they have if they meet the requirements of the law without us getting involved.
It would go through an administrative process, correct? And we'd be looking at the things that we have that are objective in our standards, which is kind of like what Kimmy was talking about, and that's the setback requirement.
Yeah.
The height, the footprint that the building occupies. That doesn't tell you anything about what it looks like.
So this process all comes down to administrative review, which in this case is Scott and Nancy. But you can do better with standards. It gives you more information to make a case, make an argument. I guess what we're trying to figure out is how specific to Morro Bay can it be? I mean, eventually we'll get into that, but that's one of my concerns, is that as their objective, do they become generic? Sure, Joe.
So I would say that, we already have, so there's a lot of prescriptive design direction provided in our new codes, and even our new general plan, far more than we've ever had in the past. And the more of those things you put in there, the more it is like somebody's coming forward with development, they're reading through here and saying, oh, it's got to look like this. It's got to have these requirements in it. And so it sets the bar higher, right? These are the minimum things that you have to do to get through the process. For objective design standards, I think maybe the minimum might be not the best way to refer to it, because it really is the only standards that we can apply,
Right.
as opposed to the minimum. But if you're depending on what you're putting in them, that kind of gives you the bar.
And I guess, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get a balance here of what we're doing, because it helps the process. In other words, a developer is helped by this process too, because they know what to do. They can, rather than going around and round, they can go more directly to a agreed upon solution. But there's also help here for the community and the context, I would hope. In other words, how do these design standards make it fit Morro Bay, right? The project. Yes?
And I believe in, Kimmy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's basically they took the design elements in our zoning code and kind of enhanced them, and provided that objectivity to them where they might otherwise be subjective. So I don't think they were recreating the wheel necessarily. They were looking at what we had in place and just creating objective design standards along those lines.
And we had to do that because?
We have to do objective design.
No, we had to take our standards and objectify them so we don't get sued.
Well, so we can actually have some say in what projects look like that come forward.
Right, but our standards don't apply right now unless we do it as the subjective design standards.
Yeah, only the objective ones would apply.
Can I just ask, in looking at the past, how many projects a year in your estimation would be subject to this objective design standards? Just looking
You're
at the
saying here
past
in
10
Morro
years.
Bay?
Yeah, and how many multifamily projects?
I don't think
see?
we've had any.
I'm not asking you. Just looking at history, are there any multifamily projects? How many a year on average?
And if he gives you the same answer, you have to say, I'm sorry.
So, I have two potentially that have been kind of sitting on the fence for years that might meet the criteria. So the criteria is between 2 and 10 units, but they also can't be asking for variances. So one of them may be out right away because they're going to have to ask for a variance, depending on which zoning code they want to go under if we ever have the new one approved. But
What I'm getting at is
two.
how much of a threat are we at to get this done by tomorrow? Is my kind of what I'm leading at. This is something we can take our time and make, because it's essentially an argument between allowing for generic design versus the threat of potential lawsuit.
There's legislation that could make use of it now. The SB 35 doesn't apply in the coastal zone, although there is bill pending right now that will make it applicable in the coastal zone. And it's gone through the Housing Committee and come out with a favorable recommendation. So it would basically take SB 35, it would strip away the sunset clause in 2025, it would make it go on forever into the future, and apply it to areas inside the coastal zone of California. There are other pending pieces of legislation related to housing and the creation of housing that also are going to have those similar things in them, and it'll again, it's formulaic. They add that clause in there related to the objective design standards. So, there's legislation out there right now it's in place on commercial properties where it could apply right now.
I think we get it. I'm just trying to ascertain how big the threat. Are we going to see 26 new developments in 3 weeks because of this, or are we talking more like 1 or 2 at the outside per year?
We don't have any proposed at the moment.
Yeah.
But that could change tomorrow.
Joe.
But this seems to me this puts Morro Bay in a particularly vulnerable position because we have enacted state laws that require that the standards be objective. And until such time as we enact our own objective standards, the would-be developer can say, here's my project, what I contend to be your subjective standards do not apply, and oh, by the way, you don't have your additional objective standards, so I get to do this, we object, and then there's the coercive threat of lawsuit, and then the calculations of what that's going to cost to respond to, et cetera, So we are in a vulnerable situation right now.
So just a comment, because I reread it again today, just for kicks. There's nothing really new or surprising in there from the way we've been interpreting our subjective, vague, unclear comments that are in our current documents. When I read through this, it's familiar. It's what we do. It's actually refreshing because some of the things we were never really sure of is clear. So the second floor being set back. The current one doesn't say what that means. This one does. It's very clear. And I've reviewed an entire project that wouldn't qualify for this because they're asking for exceptions, but I reviewed an entire project going through these, and it works. And it's comforting because there's no interpretation, there's no powwow with the other planners to see what they think it means.
So
It's clear.
this is helping. It says, "No planning commission or city council discretion may be used to interpret design provisions." How do we understand, like, why is a setback not a discretion?
It's a specific metric. It says it's 5 foot, or it says it's.
So an objective decision becomes
Well,
numbers?
if I could cut in, the setback is defined by the zoning code. Maybe that definition is changed or being refined through the new comprehensive zoning code that comes forward, but through that definition, we understand what a setback is. Some of these design standards will put a dimension or a measurement that says, here's what a setback can be. That's very different than just saying, oh, that building like looks way too close to the street and I don't like it. Sort of, if that helps. It might not.
I'm getting there. I'm working on it. Yeah.
Okay.
Joe.
Forgive me, because I may get kind of muddled in this. But I think we're all in favor of objective standards, but we're also in favor of a planning commission-like review of some projects.
Which we can't do on the state.
And I particularly look at those provisions which have a sort of a menu list of 3 or 4 or 5 details and ask the developer to select 1 or possibly 2. And I'm wondering if we might increase that number of required details. Say out of a list of 5, we require 4, unless the applicant would like to come to the Planning Commission and discuss why only 2 details should apply.
So
No,
just one clarification, because this came up last time and I noticed it when I read this. It says at least 2 of the following. So last time the question was, why did they pick 2? Why not 4? Why not 5? It says at least 2 of the following. So it's up to the applicant if they want to pick all of them, they can.
No, what I'm suggesting is in our so-called objective details, we require that the applicant pick 4 out of 5 details. Now, admittedly, that might be considered too burdensome, and he would have the option of coming to the Planning Commission and discussing why only 2 of those objective details should apply. I guess what I'm thinking
This is where it's the argument between affordable versus high design, and this is the point behind the state's law is to try to create more affordable housing, and what you're stating, requiring the 4 out of 5, it makes it more expensive, and so it would be arguable. This is one of the kernels in the middle of this discussion that really has to be hashed out by the community, in my opinion.
Well, I'll withdraw the notion of 4 out of 5, but what I'm thinking is creating some kind of incentive on the part of the developer to still seek a conceptual hearing before the Planning Commission. It seems to me that we could come up with some sort of incentive.
Let's keep going. I'm sorry for the interruption, but no, this was good. It helped me, so I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, I'll try to be brief but thorough. So the last bullet on this, there's already been case law where jurisdictions have tried to levy subjective standards on new SB 35 or new SB 330 projects. Housing advocates do take them to court. That's something we've seen. I've seen 3 or 4 in the last couple of years, just when I was just starting out on these. So that's just something to be aware of, trying to make these as clear as possible for the community and for applicants.
There's actually a group called Sue the City that does nothing but what you're describing.
Right. So this last slide, just reiterating the Housing Accountability Act, it requires cities to approve the housing that they've promised and established they will build in their general plan. So cities still have all the authority to decide where, under what standards, housing will be built. But the Housing Accountability Act also states your objective standards. You can decide, your community can decide based on what it values to require certain design requirements to address design issues. Those objective standards can't in any way preclude housing development, make it too expensive, like we were talking about, although that is a gray area. We're all trying to figure that out. And it can't result in density that needs to be reduced, density that's established by the general plan. So I just threw up a couple examples there of a couple standards which we might all agree it's clear what it's saying.
Yep.
You know, if you can't have a building that's taller than
But they're
7 feet,
impractical, right?
or you can't have your residential buildings covering more than 25% of a site. Those things might be objective, but they're still precluding development. So they're running anti to the Housing Accountability Act. And the courts are upholding the HAA very strongly because we are in that much of a housing crisis. So that's the first part of the presentation. Do we want to go over anything that I covered, or
I think we've got a sense of it, but I'll open it. Commissioners, do you want to ask anything else right now? I'd like to get through it because we also want to hear from the public too. So thanks for being patient with us, but let's keep going.
I would just state that in the current form, that the introduction doesn't very clearly articulate what you just articulated to the general public. And much of the general public that comes in here isn't aware of the housing standards, isn't hardly aware of the difference between planning and building. And so they really need to be, it needs to be carefully explained, in my opinion, why this is happening. This is not something that Morro Bay isn't just arbitrarily deciding to do this. This is being driven by the governor and the state and the legislature, and if we don't do this, X, Y, Z happens, so we have to do it. I think that some other jurisdictions have more carefully articulated this in their objective design standards, and so if you were to review other jurisdictions' intros, I think you'd find language that might articulate what I'm trying to express.
Well, say along those lines, one of the things that I was interested in was looking at comparables. So you guys have worked with other cities and done this, or are there other cities that are seen as exemplary? Like, who has done this, in your opinion, well? And is that something that we could look at and we could offer it to the public to review?
Well, we have done this work in many, many jurisdictions. I think we're running at maybe a dozen or so in the past couple of years. They're all at different stages in the process. I don't mind sharing those comparables with you, but since we are trying to center this discussion on how do we make this special to Morro Bay? How do we make this reflect Morro Bay? I don't want to get caught up with what Goleta is doing or Carpinteria is doing.
No, we're not asking for that. What we're trying to do is understand what's the standard of care. So how has Goleta made it look like Goleta? And maybe they haven't, but if we could look at other standards, that would give us a quick way to sort of understand how other places have successfully applied this.
Santa Barbara, for instance, is, mind you, they only have one specific architectural style, Spanish Colonial Revival, but they have an in-depth, very specific, dramatically more intensely specific than this is, set of design.
And have those design standards been changed into objective design standards?
Oh yeah, they are objective design guidelines that were done in 2021.
So they would be worth looking at, Santa Barbara?
If you want, in my opinion, this is just my opinion.
Sure, thanks.
If you want to look at a very rigid architectural style, a community that values that architectural style, Santa Barbara is your bet. At RM, we tried to build some flexibility while, trying to set as many expectations that were clear as possible. So we aren't quite as specific as you said. And I think because it gets so specific, you might find certain places being a little bit cookie cutter or more predictable. I guess I shouldn't say cookie cutter. Maybe predictable is more the right word because you are getting down to so many of the minute building element details that.
Why don't you kind of think about that? I think it's something at the end we might ask for. Is to
I'm not
sort of
saying we should
look at
get to that level of detail. I'm just saying we need to look at that in contrast to what we're doing so as to more carefully understand how we can articulate specifically what is Morro Bay better.
Right.
Yeah, perhaps I can add a little bit to that conversation. You pointed out Santa Barbara, which is a great example of very tightly well-written that result in what we think of as Santa Barbara. I think arguably we think of Morro Bay as being much more eclectic, and there's a variety of
For sure.
here. So to write a standard that talked about coastal architecture to where you'd end up with a bunch of clapboard, powder blue with wood trim buildings all over this place, we certainly could write a standard like that, but that is not representative of here either.
No, I think we've got enough understanding of the difference. I think it's more a matter of the form that we're trying to understand. We're not trying to
I'm not trying
copy
to create
it.
seaside Florida.
I totally, I understand that, and I'm trying to just emphasize that. So the way this is written is based upon design principles of articulation and mass and how entries appear and how fenestration works and some of those design elements as opposed to being specific to a style. And if you feel that there's more refinement that might be needed to tighten that up, that would certainly be the type of input I think we're all looking for here. But the goal is to create that flexibility that is by nature the character of your community.
So my reference to Santa Barbara was not specifically about the design guidelines. It was about their introduction and how they introduced the state's demands put upon them. And then we diverged into the design guidelines, which were nice, but I'm not suggesting that we follow their parameters on design guidelines.
The preamble, okay, I appreciate that.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, other kind of examples that you might know locally, Grover Beach has adopted some of these, San Luis Obispo has adopted these. I think Atascadero's in the process, and maybe Arroyo Grande is as well.
Are these in public realm already, all of
They
them?
are, they've been through.
So
the
maybe
process and
somebody could
adopted.
put together a series of links for us?
I think I was looking at the Bay Area for like San Carlos, the peninsula. There's several relatively decent attempts made, not spectacular, but they're just, for the sake of comparison, good to look at. I think it was maybe San Bruno or San Carlos, I can't remember which.
I mean, we could look at a dozen. I mean, that's, we love to look at guidelines.
Okay, yes, we will provide those for you, for sure. So we'll move into the discussion of the draft. So these are proposed to become a chapter within your zoning code. They hopefully clarify the design direction, as Scott mentioned, that are already found in your general plan, your residential design guidelines, and they don't propose to change some of the things that a zoning code already establishes. So the height, the setbacks, the parking requirements, those all are staying the same. And then hopefully our design standards talk a little bit more about what the building and the siding looks like. To go into applicability a little bit more, I don't want to belabor this since we have more to get through, but the different projects, eligible projects that the state has carved out include SB 330, SB 35, which is not applicable in the zoning, in the coastal zone right now, so it's not on this slide. AB 2011, SB 6, these are some newer pieces of legislation that carve out for affordable homes in commercial and mixed-use districts. So these all come with a lot of caveats. Most of them say you can't build in wetlands, you can't build in high fire hazard areas, culturally sensitive or historic districts, things like that. And also a big thing that we haven't talked about is the requirement for a lot of these to, in the process of construction, to provide a prevailing wage for the laborers. That's actually pretty big. It's just like one line in each of these laws, but it has such a big impact on the cost for developers and builders. Actually, it's a non-starter for a lot of developers and builders in the Central Coast. So not every project, not every residential project that comes forward will even be eligible, is what this slide is here to say. But eligible projects can always opt out of the streamlined review, especially if they feel like there's some sort of exceptional design that, you know, cannot be expressed within these standards, and they'd rather go through the kind of discretionary process that we're more familiar with. Projects can always decide to do that. And for some applicants, they might feel like it's a little more predictable for them. That's what they know, and that's kind of the process they're used to. So,
Can I make some comments on the applicability section? So I believe you should add overall to the entirety definitions, because many of these terms, for instance, supportive or transitional or farm work or emergency, need to be clarified and understood what those terms are for the general public, so that they're not confused.
We have definitions for much of those in our other documents, our housing elements and zoning code and general plan.
Okay, well, if they're defined elsewhere, then you don't need to.
But
If they're not defined elsewhere, then we should add them.
We'll check.
And then the last, item F, no design review. It states eligible housing development projects complying with the objective standards in this chapter shall not be subject to the provisions of chapter 1738. I think that should just refer back to the SB 35, 330, 211, 21, et cetera, because it's not just any eligible project. It's projects eligible for one of those state Senate bills that's what eligible projects are. It's not misunderstood. I don't know if I'm making sense there. Am I making any sense to you?
Let's hold on to that till the end. Okay. Let's get through this, and then we'll go back and revisit that, because that's a major point, I think. Yeah.
okay. Thank you for the comments, and we will address the definitions the next time you see this, for sure. So site design, as much as we can, we have come up with, you know, non-site specific standards for where you can place your building, how you have to site your parking and your vehicle access, making sure that there's adequate pedestrian circulation to all parts of a site, including amenity areas and your unit entrances, open space and landscaping. And one thing we should say is that a lot of these are actually already covered in the new zoning code, and so we did our best to not trip over ourselves and come up with a new standard where you, as a planning commission and the community and the city council, have all come with this zoning code and this set of standards. We make those references where we can, and then we're happy to add more to them if you believe they're not sufficient, but we tried to build in as much flexibility as we could. So for site design, going back to what Randy said, I think, about really basic principles of design, allowing for access, and ensuring kind of that the form and the placement of buildings comports with what's already there. Then we talk about parking and access, and a big aspect of this was to try to minimize the number of vehicle access points minimize the number of curb cuts, create a safer pedestrian environment, and then also minimize the amount that light and noise from vehicles intrude into homes. So there's sort of this, like, there needs to be a certain distance away from a residential unit, otherwise you need some sort of screening or landscape wall.
So could I ask a quick question about that? When one of these projects comes in, you're going to look at traffic, right? And you're going to consider signals, you're going to consider infrastructure. How do the kind of number of access points and curb cuts, doesn't that have to be responsible for a traffic analysis, for a larger vision?
It can be. I mean, oftentimes for larger projects, you'll look at traffic and circulation. Circulation is into and out of the site, and then around the site as well. And then it looks at intersection function and those types of things.
Right.
And specifically, we still do that. A lot of cities don't because it deals with level of service, which is no longer a metric. But we did have them incorporate that into our general plan so we could still use it, so we could look at intersection function.
There is
Yes.
still MMLOS other than LOS, is there not?
I'm sorry, what was that?
There is still MMLOS, multimodal level of service is what's replaced level of service. Am I incorrect?
Well, for CEQA analysis, you have to look at GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, and those types of things for it.
So I'm just wondering, at what point does it, I'm still trying to get my hands around all this. At what point does it become a conflict? If you look at a circulation, a traffic engineer tells you one thing, and you've said you could do 2 entries abstractly, who wins? Is there no point where that becomes, I don't know, a matter of traffic and EIRs, and how does that get threaded into a project?
Well, some of it, I mean, some of these things, you're going through the bills, your project is exempt from CEQA, so you're not even necessarily looking at it, because housing's the priority. So you're just left with the city to deal with
Wow.
on its own surface.
So these, like the diagrams Kimmy was just talking about, are important.
They are.
So here's where I want to get into more detail on things. This is where I think this plan is a little bit light, especially for example, we're talking about here in primary access, vehicular parking, et cetera, but there's I notice in many of the developments around town now, let's say there's a privacy gate on a condominium development, and that privacy gate is right at the edge of the sidewalk. So when a person comes into the development, they're blocking traffic because their car is sitting on the sidewalk, sidewalk traffic, I mean. And then the gate opens, but we should be defining these a little bit more articulately, I think, by saying there should be 25 feet from that sliding gate to the back of sidewalk. Just for example, that level of detail I think needs to be in this plan. It's missing. We have trees in your diagrams, your interior, your figures and so forth shown in the parking lots, but we don't have any specificity around how many trees per, let's say you got, is it one space per one tree per 5 spaces? Is it every 10 spaces we have a tree? Or, because these drawings aren't objective, these drawings are subjective in the number of trees, but we don't actually discuss, other than on the overall site, how many trees should be specific to a parking lot to shade that parking lot. There's a lot more level of detail, I think, that we need to get into, which is why I'm pushing for.
So I think one of the questions is, are we at the right level of effort, right? And description and detail around.
Yeah, we're happy to, if the privacy gate,
And
the distances for those things are something you want us to look at, we will. For the parking.
Is the best method, Kimmy, rather than, I don't want to go through it now, we don't have the time, can't happen, but maybe at this point, now that we sort of understand what we're about, we come back with written concerns specifically, to the point.
Yeah, I'm just pulling these out of a hat. I could go on.
So the parking landscaping specifically is already covered in your zoning code, the new zoning code that moved forward. So it was one of those areas where, like I said, we don't want to trip over ourselves.
So the diagrams don't really apply to the number of trees because that's in the zoning code.
It does, yeah. We have the landscaping
Right.
chapter in the zoning code that tells
It's
you.
just a diagram, it's a picture.
I mean, certainly if you think there's things, Commissioner Meyer, that are lacking and don't get there in the landscape ordinance that you're concerned about, that's great. I mean,
This would be a time to address that.
that's good information for us, and I think that's what Kimmy was saying.
I have these same kind of comments throughout the document, not just landscape.
So, I mean, I maybe for the benefit of the process, be good to get written, you know. I think
Which you
these are
have
all- these
asked
are all-
for.
Yeah, these are all valid things, Commissioner Meyer. So I'd be happy to take those so we could take a look to make sure we do have those things that you have concerns about addressed. Because a lot of times, like Kimmy said, we're not trying to step on our own toes here. We're not trying to recreate the wheel if we already have those policies in other sections of the zoning code.
If we're going to be objective, I want to be objective. I don't want to be vague. I want to be really articulately objective.
So let's do this. Let's keep going because I'm kind of seeing a process maybe kind of coming out here. And we can get in detail.
Yeah, can I just clarify one
Please.
thing? Just
Mike.
clarify for Kimmy. So this would, all proposed new by right multi-residential and mixed-use projects of 10 residential units or fewer. 10 or fewer, right? That's all we're dealing with at this point, right? With all this, no?
That's the second piece. Okay, so this is two-pronged. This is objective design. This is objective design standards that we can use for both processes. But they're one, we need to get them in place because of the assembly bills that are out there that are in place that require them, so we have something that we can use. And the other piece is, our housing element says we're going to streamline our review processes. And so we came up with 10 or fewer, you get to go through this process using objective design standards, and it would be approved at the staff level. That's also a conversation for the Planning Commission.
So can we take 2 minutes on that? Because I think that's a big piece.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Kimmy? Does that work? What I'm concerned about is we're trying to understand what it means to the state bills, the housing bills. But to apply it, the ambition to apply it to every by right project in Morro Bay, that came from the previous city council, right?
That's largely where the direction came from, correct? And it is also in our housing element, talks about us doing this to streamline the review process. The Planning Commission has every ability to change that to a different number. We just came up with 10 is kind of a round number, and it seemed in keeping with some of the conversations that we've had in the past with the commission is all.
And we don't have to do these objective design standards for both issues.
You do not.
I think I'm only thinking about this as relative to the state guidelines. I'm not thinking about this relative to all design in Morro
So
Bay.
let's ask our support group, is that a problem? Like you're writing it now for 2 ambitions. What we might lean towards is just solving the housing bills, not so much looking at it as, objective design standards for by right projects in Morro Bay that are not subject to the
Well,
housing
it's part of the
standards.
goals, so we're supposed to do this.
Goals for the housing element,
Goals for the city council.
but the previous city council.
Well, the current city council, we also have it in the current goals. That was on the slide that you had, wasn't it?
Yeah, those slides were pulled from the
The current ones.
2023 to 2025. It's like the
Okay,
short
so we'd have to
term
address that
figures.
if we.
So Chair Ocean, that was a carry forward by the current council to help us address housing issues.
Got it.
Yeah.
So let me ask it a different way, not to make a decision at this point, but in an effort to get the objective design standards moving and done, do we not want to do both? And could we postpone the other thing?
That's entirely up to the direction of the commission. I mean,
Okay, so we can consider that.
You can. I would, maybe it would be good to have another conversation on the topic,
Okay.
just to see what the issues are you're seeing, because we have a lot more flexibility when we approve things through a regular process.
Okay.
We have all of the other subjective things that we have in our codes that we can use as well. The idea would be just we're saying we're going to lean towards these objective standards for the 10 that you would go through, and we'll give you an administrative process for that. Again, those processes can be.
So it's the threshold we would be discussing.
Maybe, if you're comfortable with that. If you're not, then we need to delay the whole thing.
Yeah, because it's the no design review thing, eligible. That, of course, makes me nervous, and I think it makes the community nervous.
Okay.
And if we have to do it for state projects, I get it. But why would we do that and apply it to every project in the city I think that's a,
Well, I think it's of a certain size, and the idea is just to facilitate housing moving forward, because it's a goal of the council. I mean, it's up to the council,
Okay.
but the planning commission can certainly make whatever recommendation they want for that.
okay, so I do want to hear from the public, so we want to get to that. I want to think, I think we've identified probably our major pieces at this point. No? Okay, Eric's not happy. What are you thinking?
We just need to go through, essentially, I need to write down all my comments, submit them to staff.
Okay, well, we're not going to do that
We're not-
tonight.
I know, that's
Yeah,
what I'm saying.
Okay. Mike?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Joe?
I like your idea of bifurcating this and concentrating on addressing the challenge that the state has presented us with for two reasons. One, I'll restate the vulnerability we have right now when we have no formal objective standards in place. And two, again, I revert back to my old saw about the unintended negative consequences. Organizations like the Organization of Small Cities, I think very shortly they're going to start reporting all the undesired consequences of some of these objective standards and requiring that the objective standards be modified in some ways to sort of fix little problems.
Yeah.
And we will all learn from that, assuming that we have an opportunity to read them and hone our own. So the more we can learn from other communities' mistakes before we commit our own mistakes will be so much the better.
Okay, so let me take those comments, go back to Kimmy. In an effort to hear from the public tonight, how much further do you need to go? And if we promise not to interrupt for the next 5 minutes, will that get you through?
Yeah, I can blow through in
Okay,
5 minutes.
we promise,
Without
right, Commissioner? Okay,
questions.
we're sorry.
It's okay. So I think I left off at open space. Our standards do not, I believe, create new requirements in terms of how much open space, what the square footage is required per residential home. It just tries to outline the different types of amenities that could fulfill that requirement. There's also a couple of standards relating to views into that common open space, making sure there's visibility for that type of community interaction and safety and natural surveillance. That's kind of the design principle we're trying to get at. And then for private open space, your balcony, your patio, we outline screening options available for those, individual open space units. Moving into landscaping, I think Scott mentioned earlier, the existing zoning code already does touch quite a bit on landscaping. The city has an approved tree list for the trees that are appropriate for Morro Bay and beneficial for the type of fauna that we get here. So we've referred to that rather than coming up with our own kind of allowable plant list. And then, again, just trying to allow for landscaping buffers to obscure direct sight lines into individual homes. Building design, I think, is a bit more robust than site design, perhaps. Generally, a lot of the standards are aimed at establishing a visual hierarchy, allowing entrances and other important elements of a building to be accentuated, and then breaking up a building so that you're not just staring at a blank stucco box on a corner, requiring a certain amount of roof and wall variation, per certain number of feet. But then also trying to allow the designer to choose how that variation might be expressed. We say you can do it through different color or material changes. You can change the pattern and the distance between the windows and doors you have, the fenestration, and other decorative architectural elements like columns or pilasters or trellises that are not so much structural, but do add something to the visual appeal of a building facade. For building and unit entrances, we tried to differentiate between entrances that would be for individual residential homes versus those that might be for the building. You might be entering a residential building through a small lobby or something like that. So those two obviously operate differently, and we tried to put some words to that. Also really important for us was to provide adequate weather and shade protection for entrances, so applicants can decide whether they want to put an awning above their entrance or recess it a bit. For the section on windows, it's fairly basic. Most of these standards are aimed at ensuring privacy from sightlines. So where residential buildings are, close to another one, we give a few options for remedying that to avoid, kind of the awkward situation of, looking into your neighbor's kitchen while you're in your living room. The same has been done for the private open space. And then wrapping up here, I think we got some great comments from Commissioner King on materials and colors. So we listed out exterior wall siding materials that we see in multifamily and mixed-use construction today. It covers what we feel like are all of the bases, so allowing the designer that flexibility again, and hopefully for a variety of different materials to be used in the eclectic manner that we've seen in Morro Bay. Mixed-use standards, I think this was one area where the zoning code actually had a decent amount to say, so we were fairly light on what we felt like was appropriate. So building facades have to provide regular variations in the wall plane, stepping in or out, or otherwise providing building entrances or other elements that accentuate the facade. Any street-facing setbacks for a mixed-use building are required to be designed for pedestrian use, so you're required to have amenities like benches, drinking fountains, shade structures, planters, things that hopefully invite people to that setback space and not to just have it be kind of a dead landscape buffer. And then the entrances, these are treated very similarly to the standards in the building design standards, so I won't go into them too much here, but there is a little bit of a distinction just for commercial entrances and how those relate to the public sidewalk that they're adjacent to. Very last one, utilitarian elements. We cover a bunch of, I feel like this is the grab bag of design issues, so trash, storage, and collection areas, vent and exhaust, and then where applicable, we included as many cross-references to the other code sections. We didn't see why bicycle parking or fences or walls or lighting should be treated differently for these state mandated projects compared to anything else any other type of development you're going to see in Morro Bay. And I think that's it. I think we finally got through, so.
No, I think that's good. Do you want to go to the?
I'd like to do public comment if I could now, and can you guys hang in there a little bit? Yeah? Okay. Sorry, thank you so much for waiting. Public comment is important on this. We did get several letters as well, one from Commissioner King. So we want to get all that onto the record, but can I invite the public up and make comments? My ambition, if you can help us do this, is I think it's unlikely we're going to pass this tonight. I think what's going to happen is we're going to and I'm asking commissioners to say yes or no. But I think we're going to hear from the public. We're going to come back with a couple of key pieces that we're going to try to work on, and we can identify them after you talk in a way that includes all your points as well. So that's my ambition for tonight, and probably get that done in the next half hour. Terry, welcome.
Good evening. Once again, Terry Simons, Morro Bay. I don't have any strong specific issues because I haven't gotten into that much depth. I'm trying still to understand the overall concept of what we're trying to do here. And to do that, my typical methodology is to create an analogy. And my analogy for this is the express train versus the local train. And it seems to me that the goal of the state and their mandate that we have objective standards is to provide an express train for developers to get through a process to get housing. The question that comes up with that is if you choose to decline the express train and you say, no, you know, I don't feel the need to follow all these objective standards. I kind of want what I want, and I'm willing to take the local train and stop at all the historic stops of review and additional design review and input. Will that be a basis for denial of my project? In other words, it's kind of flipping this to the other side. One side says, if you don't have objective standards, you automatically are disallowed denying a project. But what about the person who comes in and says, I have a lot of different ideas that don't really match these objective standards. I don't want to have a wall that's limited by this long, or I don't want my entries to have these types of recesses or whatever. Will the objective design standards become a basis for denial of a project if you don't follow them? Or will there be, very much like a variance, will there be an opportunity to speak to rational minds, speak to individuals with experience and understanding about the necessities of particular types of design on particular sites, which is what's lacking in a state-mandated program. They're not site-specific. They're not project-specific. They're not program developed by the owner or builder or ultimately the occupants. They're basically trying to be so generic as to generate rapid infusion of housing into the community. We're not a community that needs a rapid infusion of housing. Yes, we need some low-income housing. Yes, we need some moderate-income housing, but I don't know that we need to necessarily fast-track that. Sometimes I think this, if we make the objective standards so detailed, we're going to deny the opportunity for some real imaginative projects. Thank you.
Can I ask our consultants and our staff, would you respond to Terry's question?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, is if an applicant with a particular project comes forward not wanting to use the objective standards in a streamlined process, they're free to do that. No one's forcing them to take this state carve-out, right? In fact, you can probably just pretend that you never adopted the objective standards. They get to go to design review, they get to
But they would
go
miss the
to-
benefits of the state bill then, right? Say adding an extra 10 feet or reduced parking or,
Well, they might not. It just depends on what comes out of discretionary review. It depends
I see.
on what you as a planning commission have at the hearings or design review with the planners and city council as well. So if an applicant wants to do that, that is totally within their rights to do so.
Scott, oh, Ron.
You can always go through the regular process if you choose
Always.
to. Yeah, I mean, even the way we have this set up, this was, if you follow the objective design standards and you like them a lot, we're saying you could do up to 10 units and go through a staff level process. Otherwise, you go through the process and it would be something that potentially just would go to planning commission,
Well-
right? I mean, that's assuming that's where it goes. If it doesn't go there, that's fine, but you would just go through your regular, discretionary conditional use permit, coastal development permit process that goes to planning commission.
So why does a developer do this process? He does it because there's no public hearings.
It's faster.
It's faster because it's administrative. And all of this is in facilitating that.
It is. It's to stream, like we're saying up front what we want, and you're looking at the menu of stuff, and you're like, yeah, I'll do that.
But to Terry's process, you would have to abandon that speed, those menu benefits, whatever you happen to pick. Well, you'd have to negotiate those then.
Yeah.
But by the state bill, you get them by right.
Yeah, you get them by right if you go through that process. Even the way that we have it, structured now, you would be following it through to get 10 units through
Yeah.
the city process that's not even related to the bill.
Yeah.
That's a streamlining, concept there. Clearly something that you have concern about. We're going to probably be talking about more, I think. But other than that, we have the new code that we wrote has a lot of flexibility in it.
Yeah.
Developers might want to use some of that flexibility in a normal way, so they don't have to be subject, as Terry said, to that prescriptive nature of it. That's completely legit.
Got it,
Yeah.
got it. Ray, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, I mean, I think they hit the points that what they lose, you have that choice. What you lose is time. You don't get the express train. But without the objective standards, any qualifying project still gets the express train.
Got it.
That's still happening, and you have no control over what that comes out
Got
as.
it, got it.
And they got to
Other-
Why they
design the
have
train.
boards.
Got it. Others who would like to speak? Thank you, Betty. Thanks for staying up so late.
Indeed. My name's Betty, and I have several comments. They're in no particular order, just in response to what I've heard. There was a comment or a slide earlier about the 2021, that there was a grant that we got to do objective design standards. Does that mean we're obligated to do them because we took the grant? And if we hadn't taken the grant, then are we not obligated? Is there a deadline involved here? That we have to have them done by a certain time? Because what I saw, again, on a different slide was that these objective project reviews do not have to be adopted until after the zoning ordinance is adopted, and the zoning ordinance hasn't even been adopted yet. So again, my concern is that we're doing it now instead of down the road. Because we're coastal and we aren't required yet, I heard you say it, yet you're wanting us to do it now. And so I feel like we're being pushed into it now instead of 6 months down the road or 12 months down the road. This just seems really rammed to me. What else? When we talk about variations like on the doorways or this or that, that adds cost to a building. And so I would like to encourage the planning commissioners to go see what Morro Bay's multifamily housing looks at like right now. And if you go down to South Main, you'll see a variety of buildings, and you'll see them from a variety of years. And they're pretty, some of them are pretty plain. The more recent one is the senior housing one. But I don't think we need, and for lack of a better word, fancy in order to get low-income housing. And this, to me, requires fancy. And I don't see how that helps the city to get more lower-income housing if we're giving them higher standards, that they have to, these objective standards. And I'm a little confused because this objective design standards is a very technical word, and yet our zoning ordinance, or the new zoning ordinance and other things talk about an objective review. And I think there's a distinction there. Maybe that's why you're talking about bifurcating this, that's really two different things. What else did I want to say? A statement was made that, that there have been 3 or 4 times where developers have sued a state agency. Is that 3 or 4 per state for the whole state? That doesn't seem to me to be very many. Or is that 3 or 4 per our county? And so I'd like to know what's the really chance of getting sued. Is it like remote or is it not? And how does density bonus play into this? Is that asking for exceptions, or is that part of the design review? I don't understand how density bonus type of stuff and other kinds of benefits that we give to developers that they can request if they do certain things, how that fits.
Did you get everything? I wanted to make sure you got everything, Betty.
No, I don't. I think those are my big points. And again, I've looked at the 35. I haven't looked at the 330. I'll do that, but again, I'm good for now.
All right. Experts, can we go through this quickly? Grant requirements, Scott, is that a true thing? Are we?
So I can address the grant. We
Nancy.
received grants 2020 and 2021, 3 different grants to cover the implementation items from the housing element update. Objective design standards is one of those. Do we have to use the money for that? We already have used the money for that. We've been working on this for 2 years. So this is the end stage of that. So there's not really a point. There's a point where we could run out of money if the discussion and the desire to continue to talk about objective design standards continues past the deadline, which one deadline is September 30th and the other one is November 30th.
Okay. And can I ask a quick question? If we were to bifurcate, there's different ways to bifurcate. One would be just to say that there still could be design review, for example, with housing projects. In other words, we don't have to separate them at birth. We could have non-identical twins.
I don't know if I'm following you, Chairperson.
If we, in other words, I'm concerned about project not having review, general projects, and I understand the incentive that's there, but I think for us, we have so few projects that good projects still make sense. And by review, there's a very good chance we'll make them more affordable as well, rather than layering on, as Betty was suggesting, you know, fancier front doors and shade, which I also agree with, but we could bifurcate by saying that the state bills, density bonus and such, have to be, you know, by law, part of this objective standards. Our other thing could have the objective standards but still have review.
Depends on what that looks like, but I suppose,
I mean, if we recommended that.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to, I mean, we can, yes, we can change it so that's a separate thing, I suppose. That if it wanted to use the objective design standards, then that's what we would do. I guess I'd have to see what we're talking about, though.
Well, we're not deciding. We're just trying to get a feeling.
It just depends on what it means, I guess. It's hard to speak to it. Certainly, changes could be made to it. You could not have the thing.
Well, we can write these down abstractly. Deadline. Betty mentioned deadlines. What are we looking at?
I think Nancy just gave those to you from the grant standpoint. That's September and November. When our grants run out.
Coastal restrictions. I know there's some restrictions on, which one is it, Scott?
SB 35.
35. And those might be, I think you explained to me, those might be changed with the Scott Wiener bill?
Scott Wiener is the one that wrote SB 35, and he doesn't like that it doesn't apply to areas inside the coastal zone, and so now his new bill, which is, what did I say it was, 423, is sought to unwind that and then extend the SB 35 beyond or indefinitely beyond 2020.
And 330 is not subject to coastal restriction?
No. None of the other 4 bills listed in the applicability.
Betty, did you kind of hear that, the answer? Okay.
Yeah, those all.
The suits, do you guys have numbers on how many lawsuits there have been?
So those, I cannot keep track of every lawsuit that happens in the state of California.
Well, just rough
but
numbers.
Those are for the state. So within the state, I can point to 4 different lawsuits where cities got in trouble trying to apply subjective guidelines 4 projects that came in under an SB 35 or an SB 30. So,
So if we were
you-
to ask you for some of those numbers, you could give us a...
Yeah, if you want more information, San Mateo, I think 2021 was probably the big one. Yorba Belinda, Burbank also have run afoul of this more
Got it.
recently. And then just, I think Cupertino recently as well. But the state attorney general is very serious about enforcement.
I think it would be helpful to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for these topics, but also for like the ADU conversation and SB 9 and all these things, there are cities that are opting to take their chances
Thank
with
you.
something
Yeah, yeah.
like that.
Density bonus, isn't that 335? Isn't that Bill 35? It's called the density bonus? Isn't that what we call it?
Well, I mean, we have to comply with density bonus law. I mean, our draft zoning code that, well, adopted by the city is not certified yet and includes all the density bonus provisions that would be applicable.
Oh, so we're talking about our city density bonus pieces.
I don't know, that was what Ms. Winholz raised. I'm not exactly sure. Is that-
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, she's shaking her head.
Yes, yeah, so it applies to projects.
Okay,
People can
got
make
it.
use of those.
Got it. Okay, others? Zara, are you interested in talking? Not tonight? Anybody else? Oh, good. You stayed so long, thank you.
Hi, I'm Margaret Carmen. I live in Morro Bay. I've been at the County Board of Supervisors all day, and now I've been here, and what I want to say is I know that we voted city council in, and they appointed you, and staff runs Board of Supervisors, and now you guys, it feels like, and it's really frustrating to me. I feel like you get bullied by what their opinion is, and it's very this. And that's what I'm hearing now. And somebody brought out that movie, which I was going to say, I don't want Morro Bay to look like that Jim Carrey movie, because I've had dinner at Seaside in Florida, and it's like you're in the Stepford Wives. Have you gone to San Luis Obispo lately? Have you gone down Madonna Road and seen those barracks? I mean, everything looks the same now, and that's what these design standards, that's what they look like to me, and that's not Morro Bay. They've already ruined Avila. It looks like a bad version of Disneyland, and I just really beg you guys to really look into your own research, not whether they're telling you that you're going to get sued for in a state the size of California. That's not much of a risk. And for you to look and say, do we want Morro Bay to look like this? I will say one thing I really appreciated, that you said you had a setback with a bench. Because when you go through San Luis Obispo, every building goes straight up to the sidewalk. So I gave out newsletters, and I've talked to at least 30 people. I'm sorry everybody's not brave enough to come, because they just don't want you to give away all your rights to this design. The people want to have a say-so about what's in their front yard, their backyard, and their neighborhood, okay? And let's see, what did I want to say? Yeah, I guess I'll leave that one out. That's it. Thank you for listening. I know it's late.
Margaret, thank you. Thank you for staying. Anthony, do we have anybody in the queue who has a raised hand?
Thank you, Chair Roshan. We currently have, we have one raised hand in the queue. Kristen Headland, I'm going to unmute you. You are unmuted.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. My name's Kristen Headland. I live in North Morro Bay. For myself, we have 2 10-acre parcels that are vacant, and there's one of them that is in the planning process where they want to build homes on the 10-acre parcel off of Panorama Drive. And so for myself, I've been a part of the decommissioning of these tanks, and I've watched the process when someone comes in and proposes what they're going to do, but they don't exactly follow what they told the city they were going to do. And it puts it on the residents to be the ones that are watching the projects. And so for myself, I like having the public notice. I like getting that yellow card to be informed and to know that somewhere in my area, I'm going to have a possible development. And I also want to say that I like going to the Planning Commission meetings where everyone gets an opportunity to voice their opinion, and you get to ask questions. You have a document, you know what they plan to build. You can reference that when the building project takes place. And also to the last, I am not in favor of administrative review. And I will say that for the previous planning commissioners, there were several projects that were spent a lot of time on planning them. And then after they were built, it was discovered that the end product was not like what the planning commissioners had decided on. So there was an administrative approval to change the designs. And so for me, I don't like this idea of administrative approval. And I was just referencing the three-story house on Sequoia. There was over on Easter, there was a deck with underground parking, and the creek there was altered. So for me, those are my comments, and thank you very much. I appreciate listening to how we move forward on this project. Thank you.
Kristen, thank you so much. You've been listening the whole time. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Any other raised hands?
There are currently no other raised hands in the queue.
Thank you, Anthony. I will close public comment. Commissioners, what I would suggest is we put together a list of points that we would like to address from our side and ask the consultants to address with the deadlines in mind. These deadlines are real. Deadlines are real, so I think we need to kind of factor all that stuff in and see if we can make it helpful for Ray and Kimmy. Do we want to try that?
And can I ask for something else?
Please, go ahead, Chair.
I'm going to look at Nancy and say, Nancy, you said something, might get you in trouble. You said you had a project that you compared to what we put together for the new design guidelines, and then you compared it with these objective design guidelines, and you said, wow, it works. Can you bring that forward to us to help us understand? I mean, you know, when you said that, I said, well, this thing might not totally be off kilter, but I'm sure we're going to have to make some adjustments to it. But I was just wondering if, when you said that, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see all of the stuff that goes into building something and how it meets our zoning requirements as well as these objective design guidelines. I'd like to see that.
So I have written notes on that, so I'll go through those and make sure that they're clear, and then I can provide them if that's acceptable.
Because I think that'll help us, because I can see us all walking away trying to, this is a hard job. I can see us all walking away trying to put together our little like spiels. I don't want to do that. I don't want to invent the wheel 4 times. I just don't have the time, the energy, or the desire. I'd like to see staff drive this a little bit more than me, because we're all busy, we're all volunteers. We've all already put 20 hours into this. I'm not saying I'm not willing to do more. It's just that when you said that, I want to see what staff has found. Show me the evidence, and then it will help me without me having to go find my own evidence. You know, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let's try this and see where we get. And we've already gotten comments from Joe and from Asia, so they're already included, and they could offer more. I'm going to make several points, and then commissioners, you can add or subtract. One is we talked about more notice to the public, how to get this out to the public so they understand what we're talking about and that what's going on. Don't know what that means, but we would like you to respond. Number 2, we talked with Kimmy about comparisons. We really, I'm super interested, and if the other commissioners are, to, you know, I mean, I've been an architect for way too long, and these guys have been commissioners for way too long. So we've seen a lot of design standards before. we can interpret. What would help us is to understand what objective design standards are and how that's kind of working. So the comparisons are good for me. Eric recommended a more clear explanation of why we're doing this. I think it's there in the documents, but maybe we kind of make it more like an opening introduction sheet. I think what's not clear with the public, and it wasn't clear to me, like the differential between that this was actually a state next to required. I mean, it's a requirement. And we might even have it as more of a requirement because of the grants we've accepted. So I think we need to be clear on why we're doing this. And maybe in that clarity, we can look at, my next point would be bifurcation. Is there ways to look at two different approaches? One, to buy right projects so we can maintain design review, and one to the city housing bills. The other thing I've heard is Kimmy was going to try to give us an outline of the lawsuits just to get a sense for how substantial or insubstantial they are. And then the big one is going to be our written comments. If we want to go through and actually offer specifics, I'll give you one idea. Like, we quite often see things where, I don't think in our zoning code we have play yard requirements. We do?
We do have generalized requirements for spaces like that. I mean, if you're looking at something more specific, then.
Maybe. I mean, like, we were looking at the one large project and it didn't have a play yard, and we're there like, how can you not have a play yard? And so I don't know. Maybe it's comments like that we could offer, and I think those might be objectified so that they could be included. Yeah, Joe.
And I have one idea, and I don't know the practicality of it, but I'm wondering if we might be able to, what I'll call stress test, some of the objective guidelines. Look at some of the recommended objective guidelines and see how they might be applied in ways that we know we would not like. And that would cast light on some of the weaknesses of those particular objectives, and maybe we could even come up with a menu to accommodate the objective guidelines about, and by the way, don't do this, this, or this with this particular objective
So
guideline.
let's go. I'm not sure I understand how that would happen. Do you? How would that happen, Scott?
That wouldn't be us.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to come up with ways
Yeah.
that the current, I mean, I guess I don't.
He's looking for ways that applicants will try to get around
Yes.
the requirements, where technically they'll meet the requirements, but it's not what we want.
I would call it an evasion, but using the letter rather than the spirit of the objective guideline.
Certainly, if you see, flaws inside of the ordinance, we'd be happy to, take that under advisement.
I can tell you a number of those, Joe, from my experiences in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, and I'm not an architect, so I don't have a wealth of experience, but I just, and we're likely to get lots of these examples in the successive years, but I'd like to see a few of them before we commit to something specific. And I just wonder the simplest way, how might these objective guidelines be misused?
I would like to point out that, to Betty's point earlier, that many of the affordable homes in this community now that we sort of, in some ways, for their eclectic weirdness treasure, are so simple, and they don't qualify under these parameters as I look at them. And so I would just like to bring up a few examples of situations in town that are, in fact, affordable by design or because they're decrepit, but quaint in some ways.
So is that something you'd like to do for our
I
next
think I will present that just
meeting?
to kind of test the waters, as it were, as to how effective we actually are being. Mind you, these are many times antiquated
All right,
properties.
so that's not a list for staff then?
No.
Did you have other things,
Well,
Joe?
that just, I'm grateful for Betty's comment because it's curious that with respect to objective guidelines, we don't make a distinction between moderately priced, and lesser priced homes.
That's one of my points that I'm not allowed to make tonight because it's too detailed, is exactly that. I mean, in the case where a number of units at some threshold is met, I think the guidelines should be lower. If affordability is X, the guidelines are Y. If affordability is...
So Ray and Kimmy, can you respond to that concern?
Was intrigued by the idea that there are lower income or affordably built, I'm assuming multifamily units, that would not meet these guidelines, and I'm certain that exists. My question back to you would be, if I brought that project before you today as a new building, would it be something you guys would have considered approving? Or are we looking back at the quaintness of it that we like, and that would not be something to be approved? Because
Your question is exactly my question. I want to know whether or not, as a commission, how do we treat this project coming
Well,
forward?
let me reframe it a little bit. An affordable housing project is different than a non-affordable housing project. In an affordable housing project, quite often they'll do zero depth on the windows. There'll be, there's no depth. They just put it right into the stucco. And that's the most affordable window you can get. Our guidelines have 2 inches, which actually costs a lot to recess that window 2 inches. But housing that has no recess, it's bad architecture, but it's affordable. I don't know how you make that decision without some sort of category. I don't know.
Asia actually, Commissioner King, sorry,
Yeah.
raises, the idea about allowing some sort of flexibility or
She did.
opportunity for deviation, and I haven't considered that. I mean, I actually didn't read it till I was here because I was busy today.
Can you do that with the objective guidelines?
I don't know. It's, I think, a conversation worth pursuing, though.
What do our experts think?
can you set a separate set of guidelines if you are pursuing affordability? Is that
I
what
think that's the
is?
question, yeah.
So that's not an approach we've taken before. We can think about it. I think with our general approach, we have wanted even affordable projects to be held to the same standard of design as.
And I think
projects
that's
that
a good
don't-
practice.
Right.
But it adds money.
Yeah, the Housing Authority says that based on current guidelines in this county, the average unit cost is $500,000 per unit,
Right, yeah.
not counting land.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. I think there's like, I don't know. When I think of my favorite buildings in this county, they were all built in a time before we had any design guidelines to begin with, before we had all this project review.
Yeah.
So I think it's trying to strike that balance of like predictability.
It's an interesting question, yeah.
And affordability. And we're trying to get there. We think our standards are building in that flexibility. I'm hearing in one conversation, these small details are adding too much cost. We can take those away. In other things, I'm hearing from Commissioner Meyer, for example, we're not being prescriptive enough about.
Exactly, you're hearing both sides.
So we need to be a little more clear about what we come back to.
But we're just asking you, how do you create clarity when you do have two different types of housing or two different types of buildings or architecture?
Yeah,
And some communities would make affordability part of their milieu, right?
all of the state mandated projects come to you with affordability built in. So SB 330, for example,
Yeah.
you can, those projects that are coming forward are required to provide at least 20% of those units as affordable for low-income.
Do they count units as per door, or do they count it by square footage?
Door.
Yeah, because in my experience, the way they resolve that is in a 10-unit complex, for instance, there'll be one 300-square-foot studio that then makes the project affordable, and then there'll be 9 4-bedroom, 2,000-square-foot homes, and they therefore qualify under SB, whatever it is. And
I don't know if we want to get into that. There's regulations that doesn't allow that, but, well, let's put that on hold. I don't know how to deal with it.
I did, in looking at Commissioner King's comment, she said she was just simply looking at the AHCD's, Department of Housing and Community Development's ODS toolkit. So there's something in writing there, state, that we can look at, I guess. But she referenced it here, so I don't know. I've not looked at it before.
Okay, let's, I mean, can we put that as a question? I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know how you solve it. I don't.
Well, I think the question of whether what you would term an affordable form, a box with a flat roof and flat windows, and that you look at today and go, oh, isn't that kind of just fit in because how it's aged, versus whether I brought that for you today,
Right,
and whether that's
right.
acceptable. That's one question. The other comes down to the idea of, are these guidelines generate more cost, thereby in theory making these affordable projects less affordable potentially. The affordability of them to the marketplace is dictated by state law. You have, your, county median income. That's what's going to decide how much these things can be rented for, sold for. So that's built into the process. But beyond that, the funding sources, and I think Scott even spoke to one of them, that regulate affordable housing, say you have to do a whole bunch of things. And then most of these things aren't cheap because they're actually intended for the longevity of the house as well as the aesthetics of it.
Got it.
So there's more to the equation.
So can we put that one on hold? Because I'd like to see if we can finish this in 5 minutes. That's just a goal. So I want to hear from all the commissioners to see if we've got our list complete.
Yeah.
We haven't heard from Mike.
Well, you caught most of what I think we were talking about, Chair. One thing I'd like to recommend, that way we don't all go away thinking we have a huge job to do individually, is that we're asking for a lot of information, a lot of additional information. I'd like to get that information before I start doing my job, right? I want to do all of this stuff that Bill requested,
So
get that information.
We should talk schedule. All right.
Yeah, schedule. That's why I have here September 30th, November 30th. Let's get me that information. That way I can start working as a planning commissioner on what I think these guidelines should look like, do some comparables or whatever, right? Look at some other ones, because I just don't want to walk away from here and think I have all this work to do. If I can get additional information, that'll help me do my job, right? Does that make sense? If we get that information, then it's going to help all of us.
Let's finish the list and then we'll do schedule.
So that's it.
Okay, Joe, did you have anything else?
No, I agree with your 4 points.
Where we're going?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eric?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk schedule.
Yeah.
First of all, let me say thank you for staying up late and being here. It really was a help. This is a hard subject to understand. I think that, I've been involved with commissions for a long time. This is a big change, how we're going to deal with this, and to find a fair medium is not easy. So I think we're doing somewhat pioneering work, and I can hear it in your voices that, you're trying to figure things out that really are specific to Morro Bay. I want to thank you for that. That's really where we're all coming from. We want something that is a product for us. That being said, how do we get this done based on those outline points?
Well, I mean, we have the input that you provided. Some of it is report back stuff. Some is on you folks to give us information. We have written comments from some of you, not others. I think some of the written comments from others will be informative to the process.
Okay.
Moving forward.
So I think just quickly, Eric's ready to do it. I'm ready to do it.
Okay.
Joe's ready.
Joe's done it, and then I will do it.
Okay.
Just give me a timeline.
Sorry.
Timeline.
And then we have some of the stuff that we can gather and
Yeah.
give to you, and go from there. I think, before we schedule the next meeting, would want to have the input from the commission, or say we're going to bring it back on this hearing and we're going to bring back what we have. I guess that maybe that's potentially the better way to do it.
I did want to clarify one of your comments where you said more public notice. Were you talking about more public notice for these discussion hearings or for the projects?
I'm happy to create a webpage for this. On this,
Maybe that would help.
and then we could do a notify me. We could do post that way, and we could we do that for projects. We could do.
I mean, for me, what's important is, one, that the community starts to understand that this is state law. This is not an option. The way I'm hearing it and the way I understand it.
If you bifurcate it, it's an option. There's 2 parts to this. Part of it is
Bifurcation,
state
yeah.
law, but the rest of it is an option. And that's the clarification that really needs to be laid out. And I have one more point, just while I got the mic,
Okay,
that we
sure.
should maybe think about discussing with you guys. All of your illustrations reference one specific architectural style, whereas like your slides reference many different architectural styles, and I would like to suggest that every illustration references a different architectural style, because I don't want to end up with 10 different developers coming in with this architectural style going, here it is, guys. I want to see
which they
different
do,
styles.
yeah.
And I think that we should, it's a relatively easy thing to pull out of a hat, I think. You guys probably have
Very,
one.
very good statement. I can
So
support
that's
that.
number 8. Thank you, Eric.
One thing I would like to ask you guys to do as you go through this process is, because we batted around in a bit of a Socratic method here, the extremes of some of these ideas. And that's great for conversation, but it's not great for arriving at the end result. I would like to see, as you begin this, is to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Are we trying to provide more housing? Are we trying to just have as much control as the planning commission?
That's
without
easy.
being there? What are
Both.
those, what's that
Both.
thing?
We want both.
We want it all. We want it all. And use that as a bit of a lens of your evaluation as you go through this. What is really the outcome?
It's a good
we're trying to
point.
get
Thank you. And I've never heard a consultant say Socratic method, so thank you. Do we have soup? Any other comments?
Do you
Can you
know-
guys criticize us and tell us what you can't do before we adjourn?
Well, the only other, Chair, is that, again, when did Scott want our input? That, it's going to be a two-way street. They're going to be sending stuff to us. I don't know when, but they want our input too. When did you want that by, Scott?
So we're not going to have the.
I'm going to try to do
We're
it.
getting all this stuff done in.
I'm going to get mine to Scott before the week's up. And he should pass it on to you guys, so you guys can mull it over and.
One thing we're really going to have on the 5th for that special meeting.
I just want to make
is
sure
their-
that
is
I
work
get my,
they're doing. So
do my
we're
homework.
Bringing this back on the 18th. I think we should make it enough time. Like, give them the 18th, that's when we're coming back.
But he doesn't want to do it.
But for,
Done. We're done. I will do it. But I have all these pens.
so what we're talking about right now is, when can we bring this back? It's not going to be on the 5th. That's a dedicated meeting. The 20th is certainly too quick. And so what we're looking at right now is, and checking calendars on, is for July 18th.
That works for your deadlines, right?
It does. I'm just making sure that I'm not committing folks to things they can't do.
So Nancy and Scott, when would you want our comments, say, especially if we want to be thorough, when would you want our stuff into you? Because we're all going to take another shot at it. I know Commissioner Graffia started, right? But I'm sure he's not done.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if we could get it back by, say, the 27th of June.
27th of June.
We commit.
Okay.
And then the comments that you do have and you develop on your own time, I would probably recommend that you state them at the beginning of the next meeting. That way the public is fully in the know of like how your thoughts have developed, and not all the decisions are being made by this channel here, but that we keep it in the public hearing as much as possible. Yeah, just for transparency.
Perhaps they could be published online, like any other letter?
So what I was talking about doing was creating a web page for this effort, so that you and others could direct people to it if they have questions, concerns, comments, whatever. And then we could post the correspondence there. We could post the staff reports that we've written to this part and the drafts of the documents. So that can all be there.
And Scott, is there a way we could get any information that you have prior to us having to submit? Can you give us information?
We'll work on our end and try to get that stuff to you. Yeah.
Because
within the next
that'll
week or
help
so.
me, that'll help all of us if we have that information, because by the 27th, I will submit something to staff, but I would love that information that we asked for.
Okay. We'll work on it.
A sincere thank you to all 4 of you. Thank you, and to all 4 of you. Thanks for hanging in there. We do have presents and badges. You get a little. I adjourn the meeting.